Right, good afternoon, everyone. It's just gone 2 o'clock, so if we can make a start to our meeting. Welcome to the Corporates and Resources Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Filmer, I'm Chairman of the committee. Just a couple of items of housekeeping and notes before we start the meeting itself. Can I welcome everyone who is with us in the room and also those who are joining us online today. Could I just check with someone who is online if you can hear us, if you could just indicate that you're hearing us loud and clear, please?
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you very much. Just to remind everyone, the agenda pack with papers is available via the ModGov system or directly from the council website from the link that was sent out to members. And just a reminder for members that there are a couple of supplementary documents that have been issued. So again, if you're looking at it through ModGov, you'll need to look at those separate from the agenda itself. Could I just ask, when I speak, ask someone to speak, that you clearly state who you are, so those of us or those who are joining us online know who is speaking, and those who are listening potentially to a recording in the future also know who has done that. Can I again just advise the meeting that this is being audio recorded, and also just request that anyone in the room, if you've got a mobile phone, could you please make sure it's turned off or turned to silent, just so it doesn't interfere with the meeting. And those who are joining us online, if I could just ask if you can make sure that your microphones are left turned off, and if you could turn your cameras off as well, that will just mean that we get a clearer view of the presentations on the screen in the room, which would be helpful. Finally, just to remind everyone, the agendas can now be viewed electronically, and would request that members and officers refer to the page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist others in following the meeting. Finally, there is no planned fire drill that I've been advised of, so if the alarms go off, then it is real. We will show you how to safely leave the building and where to congregate. So we move on to item 1 of our agenda. That's apologies for absence. Mr. Jackson, is there any apologies that we've received, please?
There are, Chair, thank you. We have received apologies from Councillor Lovell, for whom Councillor Hobhouse is substituting. We have also received apologies from Councillor Ham, Councillor Pearlstone and Councillor Cottle. Councillor Johnson was substituting for Councillor Cottle. She's unable to attend but is online. Other committee members who are online are Councillor Pearlstone and Councillor Collins, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any other members? No, thank you very much. So we move on to the next item, which is minutes of the previous meeting, which have been circulated. Just one thing I'm going to ask Ms. Jackson just to clarify for us, relating to the minutes, item 38 on those, it was relating to council minutes and how we record those, and how that is done in terms of naming members or not naming members. Just wonder, Ms. Jack, if you can give us an update on where we are with that and what's happening.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, at the last meeting we had a brief discussion about the naming of specific councillors within minutes and whether that was common practice. I stated at the time that unless a member has specifically proposed or seconded or made a recommendation, then their names would not be specifically recorded in a set of minutes outside of full council. Just on the back of that, as a management team in Democratic Services, we've been working on a service charter, we're calling it, which is the aim to try and standardise the approach to all committees and the administration thereof, including the minutes. So we are hoping to get that agreed before December, Chair, and we will obviously circulate that to members so that it's a clear sort of expectation of what our intentions are in terms of recording minutes, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As I say, members, you've had the minutes of the last meeting circulated. Are there any amendments to those, or could I have a proposal that we sign them as a true and accurate record, please? Proposed by Councillor Stoughton. Is that seconded? Thank you, Councillor Trimnell. All those in favour that we sign them as an accurate record, please show. Any opposed to that? That's clearly carried. Thank you very much, and I'll sign those at the end of the meeting. That brings us on to item 3, which is declarations of interest for members who are in the room. If there are any declarations you have over and above the standard declarations that we already have outlined in terms of membership of other councils. I'm not seeing any, so thank you very much. Item 4 brings us on to public question time, and I don't believe we've received any. Okay, thank you very much. which takes us then to item 5 on our agenda, which is the 2023-24 budget monitoring report, month 6. And I think, Mr. Vaughan, you're going to introduce this one, please, or Councillor Lakesham.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just introduce very briefly to say that the favourable movement to month 6 is very welcome. It is, however, mainly down to one-off savings or money coming back in, and therefore those won't recur in future years. However, it does enable us to better protect our reserves, which will undoubtedly be needed in future years. So it is still very welcome, and I'll hand over to Jason. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to add a few things to the report. So in terms of the predicted variance at this stage, it is a move in the right direction from the previous month. Now projected outturn of £18.7 million overspend. That's 3.8% of the net budget. We are, in terms of a gross spend, about a £1.5 billion organisation, if you include schools, but net budget about £500 million. I was just drawing members' attention to paragraph 3 on page 17. As part of the response to the overspend in the current year and the emergency actions that are being put in place to address the overall financial systemic problems that we face, as it were, we have put in a number of control boards and different panels to scrutinise all expenditure across the piece. So you'll see there listed, we have an establishment and recruitment control board. So that's looking at all recruitment in the workforce, making sure that we don't just fill a vacant post, but actually challenge whether that's still needed, what's still required, would we have to do that. So it's not a blanket freeze on recruitment, because there are some posts legally you must have. There are some posts, actually, if you didn't fill them, it would actually cost you more money. Second board is commercial and procurement board, looking at all our sort of non-staffing spend, or those contracts across the piece, challenging when they're up for renewal, or new contracts coming up, or uplifting contracts to try and reduce down the spend on all of those. The third one is a spend control board, so looking at all those discretionary areas of spend, and we have put £100 limit in. So there is processes across the piece now to challenge every single piece of expenditure that council is making, to make sure that it absolutely has to happen, and there's no ways of avoiding it. Part of that process actually has been to force people to do what's called purchase orders when they're buying goods, to actually do that at the start of the process. That's actually good financial discipline that you would want to do anyway, and fits in with the new finance system as well. So that actual control actually is improving sort of behaviours, if I describe it as that, to be better financial management across the council. And the last 2 bullet points around the panels for adults and for children's, reviewing all placement costs. Obviously, this is a big area spent both in adults and children's. So actually having those peers review placement costs to see how they can bring them down, etc. over time, whether they're the correct placements for those people as well. So those combinations of things, I think, will continue to put, hopefully, some downward pressure on the budget. And I would hope that going forward, we'd start to see this variance come down. As I've said before, I don't feel confident it come down to 0, but clearly it's moving in the right direction. And I hope that momentum continues as we go on the rest of the year. In terms of the report on table 1 on page 18, you'll notice this is a new format. It's a bit more detail. So underneath the main service headings, there's the breakdown. These tie into the management structures with service directors. And you will see we've tried to simplify this with a simple red and green as to whether that service, in terms of its variance and predictions, is either good or bad. I would ask scrutiny members for any comments in terms of the format of this report. It is evolving. It is a slightly different style to what you've had previously. So the main report is a lot shorter, so we can bring out the key items, and that's what we're trying to do here. Then we have 10 appendices that provide a lot more detail. So hopefully if you read the main report, you get the real gist of what's going on. But if you want to go into the detail, you can do. So you can dive into each of the services and see more detail within there. Because this is a quarterly report, we've also got some other information in here. For instance, Appendix 9 has the MTFP savings. So this is the £40.9 million that you at full council agreed as savings for the year. And there's a monitoring report on how we're doing against those, which savings are at risk, which have been achieved, etc. So hopefully this new report is a bit more kind of user friendly. There's lots of detail in there if you want to get into it, but if you just want to look at the main part and get the general gist, hopefully it strikes that balance between the two sort of styles, as it were. I'm happy to take any questions or clarify any points on the report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Trimnell.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I just wondered if you could tell us something about the members of these boards who are overseeing things. You described them as peers. I wondered who they were. And also, I have a question about table 1. Red being where there's a problem, green being where there isn't. Is it a mistake under adult services total, education, partnerships and skills? The original budget 17.4, current budget 14.1, full year projection 14.4, with a 0.3 variance at month 6. And that shows as red, but that looks like it's actually fallen below the target. Is that a mistake?
I'll do the last one first. So the original budget was what you would recognise the figures at full council that you agreed in February. The current budget would reflect any what's called varments or supplementary allocations. So if we've moved budgets around between budget areas to align them into the right place, and that's particularly happening not so much on adults actually, but in some of the other areas where we've brought the district budgets together, you'll see we're moving stuff around. The current budget is the latest budget. So for that particular one, the original budget was 17.4. That's reduced down to 14.1. So the spend against that 14.4 should be viewed against the current budget of 14.1. So it is an overspend of 300,000 there. So that bit is correct. I'm trying to think what your first question was now, and I've forgotten. Oh, the people on the panels. So these are officer boards across the piece. In terms of the adults and children's panels, it is peers within the service. And senior people are overseeing this, so directors of adults and children's are overseeing and running those panels. There is also finance people attending those, and that invitation has been opened up to service directors and executive directors also to attend those as well, to oversee. But it's that peer-to-peer pressure of, they're the service experts to sort of say, you've placed this child in that placement. Does that seem appropriate for the needs of the child? Is there something we could do at a reduced cost or do it in a different way? It's particularly also reviewing the length of time. Some of these placements are done, particularly in children's, you do them quite quickly to find a place. Quite often those initial placements are quite expensive because nationally there's a real issue on finding placements, but actually you would hope within a short period of time you move them out. So it's picking up on those things as well, making sure we don't just leave a child in a placement that could be very costly and not appropriate for the child, but move them into a better placement, hopefully a cheaper cost, and hopefully not any placement at all, things like foster caring and things like that. So it's trying to manage that whole process through.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from members? Oh, so sorry. Thank you very much. Sorry, just throw my glasses around the room. Any other questions or comments from members? And there's nothing online as well. Okay. Thank you very much. I think obviously I think from my own view, in terms of the format, I think it has been useful, the layout, to have those breakdowns, and then the more detail that members can get into in terms of looking through. One question I was going to ask, and it is in effect looking at table 1, which was, I think, on page 17. At the moment, we're still seeing pressures growing in adults and children's care. I think the adult services are basically no change from last time, and actually the children's have got worse. that's obviously what's in motion at the moment. Are you, from your comments that you've made, there is obviously work going on looking at future savings in terms of those, but how do you see those coming through? Because there look to be an awful lot of savings coming through in all other sections, but as a whole, we need everyone to deal with that, because otherwise, adults and children's, as we said at the last meeting, is so big compared with everyone else. If they don't address it, everyone else is going to get lost in the lack of savings. So I wonder if you can just give us some confidence that you're happy that there are savings that are being, or methods of which of achieving savings are being looked at, that we can look forward to seeing in the due course.
Yeah, just pulling that together in paragraph 2, you'll see the overall comment there. When you look at adults and children's together, they're £27.3 million overspend. Actually, every other part of the council is underspent. So clearly that is the real pressure areas. They do account for a significant element of our budget. So even we'll come on to that paper later around next year's budget, they're towards 70% of our spend. So actually, if those two areas are overspending, that causes the council a real problem, because the rest of the council is such a small proportion of it. It is a national issue, although I would say nationally there seems less pressure in some of the adults areas than we're experiencing. Children's is across the board everywhere. You read any upper tier authority, most of them have an overspend in children's, and that's because the external market seems to be broken. There's quite a lot of corporate finance been invested in private companies that are making significant profits out of children's placements, which is going on, and nationally they're trying to do something around that. But that is a national trend. I think the problem with both of these budgets are they are demand-led budgets. By their very nature, it's really hard to control them. We can't alter the needs of those people coming into us. You hear the major term they talk about for adults and children's is the front door. How do you avoid expensive placements? It's actually by not taking people into care in the first place. So what's that prevention activities you can do that saves the money? And if they do come into care in whatever form, what's the cheapest form of care you can do? So if I look at children's, one of the key things there is foster caring. Actually, that's a lot cheaper than an external placement by a long way. So you want lots more foster carers in Somerset than what you want placements, etc. So those types of activities are there. And if you tied it into the performance report you've seen over the last year, actually the number of foster carers have dropped. So that has been a factor in terms of why we're now paying more on placements, because there's a lack of foster care placements. So you want foster caring from a financial point of view, it's a lot cheaper for the outcomes for children. I think practitioners would say it's better rather than being placed in an external thing. So those things are monitored. They're really difficult to turn around and control.
Thank you very much. I'll come to Councillor Soughton, and then Councillor Collins is indicated online as well. So Councillor Soughton.
Thank you, Chair. You've said here that you're establishing recruitment control boards. My question really is, how is that going to impact on devolvement of assets staying to town and parish councils, in the sense of maybe some staff might be cheapied over, or if we haven't got it, is that responsibility then going to come down to the town and parish council to recruit their own staff, or is that, how's that going to work in reality? If it's kind of what I want to know, really.
This is one of those when I can smile because I can look across the room at my colleagues who are expert in these areas and just about to bring it. In terms of those boards, they are very much around our staffing establishment, how many people we employ, and making sure we don't go out to fill a vacancy that actually in February you may take a decision at council we make that post redundant. It's avoiding doing those sorts of things as a generalisation. But I don't know if Alan or Sarah, I can see them both looking at each other to just see who answers the specific bit about the asset devolution piece.
Thank you, Chair. It would depend on which services obviously were devolved to a city, town or parish council, what that involved in terms of staffing to support that. But yes, it's very much on our radar that 2P considerations could apply depending on the nature of that. Certainly it's under consideration for the pilot devolution project that we've got at the moment. So yes, we're working with our workforce leads on that to understand that. But I think that is separate to the more internal recruitment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Collins, online, please.
Hi, yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the rundown on the latest financial positions. Two questions. The first one regarding the children's services. It was mentioned a couple of meetings ago. We have management consultants, Newton Europe, who seem to be featuring in last month's Private Eye quite considerably. I wonder if we could have a rundown, firstly, on how much they're costing, and secondly, what savings do we think they might bring on board? And second question regarding capitalisation. I mean, as I understand it, if we can sell off some of our commercial assets and then get the government to agree to capitalisation, that would allow some of those monies to tackle the revenue shortfall. If you could just confirm my understanding of that is right, and how we go about getting capitalisation permission from the government. So two questions, firstly to do with Newton Europe, the management consultants, and secondly to do with capitalisation.
Mr. Vaughan.
In terms of Newton Europe, so they're involved in adults, not children's. So just to clarify that, there was a paper that went to the executive setting out that the cost of them is £3.5 million in the current year and £3.5 million next year, so a total of £7 million. That is performance related, and that is based on them delivering £10 million of ongoing savings. In terms of children's, actually, we have a different consultants in looking at that. That is People 2, not Newton. In terms of your second question about the capitalisation direction, can I park that and come to that when we come to the paper on the budget for next year, because it might be more relevant there. So if I don't mention it, I'm happy to be reminded about sort of dealing with that.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've also got Councillor Chilcott.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question for me. The big sort of move and shift in this paper seems to be around the 7 million connected to connecting Devon and Somerset. Excuse me, I've got a new cat. Can I just ask, it says in the paper that it's likely to change potentially. So at what point will we get a better understanding of that? How comfortable are we with the 7 million? And I'm just wondering why something like this wasn't factored in at a sort of an earlier date in the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. If you can also just explain the origins of that 7 million would be really helpful.
Yeah, so the £7 million is a kind of once-off windfall. It's a gain share, I think it's described as a result of the initial contract several years ago and how much take-up of broadband there is. We'll provide more details going forward. I think in terms of the number, it is around that number. So we're not expecting it to vary hugely, but there is a split across all the different councils that contributed initially. So it's just ironing out some of those things. I think the shift is more in the hundreds of thousands rather than anything more significant than that, to give members some assurance. This is the first time we've had it. We've known about it, but not had figures around it. So now is the first time we're actually able to put a number on it. So that's why it's come forward now. The payment actually will be in March of this year. So we're forecasting it actually quite early rather than the other way round of known about it for a long time and not being aware of it. So we're flagging it up very early that we're confident this type of number is going to come through.
And again, just so everyone understands, it's basically because there's been this bigger take up by members of the public of the broadband services that have been provided than was expected and budgeted for, which is just good news in itself. So,
absolutely.
Councillor Wilkins.
Yeah, I don't know whether you want to answer this now or later on, but with the council tax, I've noted that North Somerset and various other councils have been looking to impose on second homes a double council tax. has there been any work done by Somerset Council on this?
Yes, yeah, the answer is yes. Actually, you as members, you may have forgotten about it because it was last year. You've actually already approved we do that. We are bringing a paper back to you in December, reconfirming that, because when you did it last year as part of budget setting, the legislation hadn't been through and agreed. It now has done, so we can formally do that. So December the 20th council, you'll have a paper on that.
Is it part of these figures?
No, so there's two parts to it's part of the new levelling up bill. So there's two parts to it. There's empty properties, charging for those earlier, and there's a charge on second homes. One of them takes effect from next year and the other one's from 25, 26. So yeah, they're not in the current budget and monitoring reports. Like I say, the report on local council tax support scheme, and I think it's just on that paper, it covers it in there from memory. I'm looking these across the table to remind me because I've seen so many papers lately.
Cancellation.
We're seeing one paper tomorrow on council tax reduction scheme, and then we'll see this later paper at December full council, which doesn't need to go to the executive tomorrow because it was approved last year. We are in effect, if we vote for it, approving it again with that revised date because the government put it on hold for a further financial year. So it will look the same, just have different dates on it.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Chair. A question for Jason through you, Chair. Regarding the empty properties, could you just remind me if my memory serves me right, please correct me if I'm wrong, is there a scaling of the percentage that is loaded for the length of time that the property has been empty?
Cancellation.
Indeed, there is a scaling. Without giving any detail of where or for whom, the biggest issue I've seen with a council tax bill because of an empty property has been £23,000. And there are possibilities where people perhaps inherit a property from a relative or a friend and don't realise by leaving it empty for many, many years that because they've not set up an account themselves for the council tax for that property, they don't realise it's accumulating within the property. And so when we look at the papers at full council, people do need to understand that the tax goes with the property, not with the owner. And so there are lots of complications on exemptions and premiums. And there are also, of course, since the 1st of April this year, no longer the 6 months or 9 months or 12 months that different districts used to have on Class C and Class D empty properties as well. So I've had quite a few emails about that. That is one of the areas where councils have more autonomy than other areas on council tax. And so we have done what we can in order to enable our council tax reduction scheme and our exceptional hardship scheme, and also to help us balance the budget. But they are, I find them quite technical, quite complicated papers. So the one we'll see at executive tomorrow is one part of it. There are other parts, and then there are other parts that are not changing. So one of the things I will ask Richard Seeley to do, who's the lead officer, is actually just give me a breakdown of all of those different exemptions and premiums on council tax just on one sheet of A4, because I think that would be a really useful member briefing note.
Okay, can I just come back there? Also, I'd like to ask a question, because I did ask this question when it first came up as well. So how successful we've been on reclaiming some of that unpaid council tax that is not part of any exemption scheme or whatever else. Thank you.
Councillor Leishon.
Yeah, indeed. We've forecast just under 97% collection rate. There is the amount of money that you may well have seen in the local press about uncollected council tax over something like 20 years. There is reference to it in one of the papers. I think it's the 24-25 paper, or maybe the council tax reduction scheme paper, or both. That shows that nearly 43 million having gone down to 36 point something million. Some of those debts are 20 years old. Some of them are where people have died. I think it's possible that district councils dealt with debt on council tax differently. I can only speak for the district council where I was on the cabinet, where we used to have pink papers with arrears, some of which were written off because people had moved abroad, died, whatever, and that the debts were considered to be non-reclaimable. So I think there's a longer story behind that. I absolutely welcome all the questions that I've had at LCNs and at the SALC AGM, with people asking, what are we doing about that, both now, looking backwards, and also, of course, looking forward. So far, since COVID, collection rates have held up better in both council tax and business rates than was expected during the lockdowns. That doesn't mean it's easy for people, and for a lot of people, our council tax reduction scheme and exceptional hardship scheme are very important. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions at this point. So can I thank you for the report that's been presented. I think, as members have said, it's welcome to see the reduction in the deficit, but as Councillor Leishon said, that's a large section of that is a one-off, which we obviously note. Obviously, the processes are in place, looking for further savings for the rest of this year, and without totally stealing Councillor Leishon's words from a previous meeting, it's the further and faster in terms of finding what we need to, and obviously, as things come forward over the next few months, there'll be more detail coming through. I think that having the monthly review of this going to exec and to scrutiny, I think, is useful because it does highlight things as they're coming through. So thank you very much for that. And if you can thank the team, Mr. Vaughan, for the work that they're putting in trying to address the situation that we currently face. There will obviously be further discussions about next year's budget on a further item further down the agenda. So if members are happy that we note that report with those comments, thank you. Which takes us then to item 6 on our agenda, which is the general fund capital budget. Sorry. And Councillor Leishon, are you introducing that as well?
I'll just introduce very briefly, Chair, by saying capital programme is a really difficult place to be at the moment. We all understand the cost of living crisis and how that has impacted on household budgets, but it's certainly impacted very heavily on the construction industry, and I'd include highways in that. And so the capital programme, one of the things that we're seeing here, the same as councils are seeing all over the country, is slippage. I'm really pleased to say this is just a very minor point, but one of the projects in the Glastonbury Town deal has been de-scoped twice. So it went from a complete rebuild to a partial rebuild, partial refurb, and then went down to a full refurb because of the need to de-scope to keep the project within budget. And that has gone out to tender, not through a framework, but to what we call a tier 2 contractors, and 5 really solid tenders have been received, 3 from Somerset, 1 from Dorset, 1 from Wiltshire. And I hope I'm not being over optimistic when I say I take that as a good sign, because I'm pretty sure 6 months ago we would not have received 2 tenders. So I'm hoping that means that construction companies are stabilising. They are able to get quotes for whatever steel, concrete, whatever they need, and that those prices are holding at more stable levels now. Otherwise, I don't think we would have had 5 tenders back. So I'll hand over to Jason, if I may, and I'll continue to keep my fingers crossed for the capital programme. Thank you.
So this is the first report of the capital programme. Just draw your attention, I think, to paragraphs 7 and 8 in the report on page 78 in the table there, just in terms of summary. So the budget for the year at £316 million. So we have got quite a large capital programme. I think the key thing there is the end two columns. So the slippage of £85.6 million and projected underspend of £6.8 million. I think this highlights, and I'm trying not to look at Councillor C because he say I told you this already, that we're not very good at predicting our spend within year on capital. I think that slippage of £86 million, when you look at that as a percentage of the budget, you know, it's virtually 25% plus. There's more work to do on this to get this right. Obviously, the programme we inherited this year, as it were, was some new schemes for the new council, plus the inherited 5 programmes from the 5 predecessor councils. So I think the work on this area over the next sort of 3-4 months is to actually get those profiles more accurate of when we actually think the spend will be. And that's really important. You know, when interest rates were really low, actually, if you got your profile slightly wrong, it didn't make a lot of difference. When interest rates are at 5+%, it really does start making a difference, because we use this information to when we borrow money, when we think we need to borrow money. So actually getting more accurate projections on capital now is really, really important. So that's all I was going to say in terms of an intro. It's an area I'd flag up as it's a good starting point, but there's more work to do on this.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions? Councillor C.
Thank you, and thank you for the name check. The conversation we actually had was with respect to quarterly forecasting. One of the key things is towards the year end, you have projects which are in danger of hopping over from one financial year into another and defeating the MTFP. So are you actually tracking to quarter, and are you in danger of presenting us with a quarterly breakdown at any stage?
So these projections across the whole year, but I think the point you make about quarterly forecasting is what we want to get to, so that it is a lot more accurate. Everybody says their scheme will start magically on the 1st of April and it will be finished by the 31st of March. You know, that clearly just doesn't happen. So actually that when schemes start and which quarter they start in is something we want to try and adopt as a way forward. It does make a huge difference to the numbers as you start to do that, and therefore the financing charges that come out of that. So it's an absolute aspiration, and I pinched it from you, and we will try and get there. But I think this shows we're quite some way off of that at the moment.
And just by way of recompense, can I congratulate you on the presentation in the report? I think the ways in which you're now tracking and producing information on the budget are extremely clear now. I found no difficulties with that.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from members in the room? I'm not seeing any at the moment, so we've got Councillor Chilcott online.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a couple of questions, if I could. The first one is, I really think it'd be helpful within the papers, and I'm just sitting and reading them, to understand when you have such an underspend, the actual impact that that has had on the revenue budget. Because when you set your budget at the beginning of the year, any interest, if you like, that you have or hadn't accounted for alters the amount you can spend on our vital services in Somerset. So every time you get it wrong or it's way out, it's impacting on our community. So that's the first question. Second question is around the Octagon, which is on page 91. So the final paragraph there says the Octagon Theatre project was acknowledged not to be deliverable in its current form, and then it says that it will be removed from future capital reports because of that, and from what I'm reading, there will need to be a new capital bid. When I look at the table above it, it's actually shown a slippage into future years, which to me says it hasn't been removed. Could you just clarify, because what I'm seeing on the table doesn't seem to quite fit with the wording there? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Councillor Lashon.
If I could go to the Octagon first, please, Chair. I completely acknowledge that papers here and for executive have got, if I say different versions, I don't mean that anybody has purposely made a different version in a paper. This paper dates to the end of Q2, which is the 30th of September. The decision by executive was on the 4th of October. I completely acknowledge that that seems quite a long time ago now. But if you take, when we discussed this, because it was quite rightly raised by another person as we were going through the process before these papers were published, they said, are we talking about this project on the 30th of September, or are we talking about this project on the 5th of October? And of course, the theory is it's the end of Q2, so it was still in there with it as slippage. We know, though, that the decision was taken on the 4th of October. We also know that there is a great deal of work going on with the Arts Council and with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport regarding the £10 million grant to see if there is another way for the outcomes of the project to be delivered that enable us to keep that DCMS monies in Somerset. And their partners include Yeovil Town Council, this council, Arts Council, DCMS. There are considerable number of meetings going ahead. We're not yet in a place to come up with the desired option, but there has been an Octagon board meeting. Now, an Octagon board meeting is not in itself a decision-making board. Its status would have been different in its earlier life at South Somerset District Council, so we take that into account. Options from 1 to, I think it was 8 or 9 were considered. Options 1 to 6 required Somerset Council to take on very considerable borrowing at, as we know, greatly increased rates. And so options 1 to 6 were understood to be undeliverable, but options 7, 8, 9 were considered by the board. A further option, which I call 7+, other people call it option 10, was considered. We are now working with all of those partners to see whether option 7+ or 10 is acceptable to DCMS, because we are doing absolutely everything we can, as I'm sure you would expect, to try and keep that £10 million in Somerset. And rather, the alternative, of course, is that it goes back to DCMS and back to the Treasury. And we want that money to be spent for the benefit of Somerset's residents. So that's where we are at the minute. So apologies that we've gone across the month end, and I'm well aware that we've got different versions on the Octagon line. So my apologies for that.
So, Chair, if I may, so in the paper, you're saying two things in the paper. You're saying within the figures that it's slippage, and in the words you're saying it's removed. So that's all I was asking. At either when the paper was written or now, one or the other, the up-to-date position is slippage, or is it removed from the programme? Because this paper is saying both. Thank you. And the paper was written at the same time.
Cancellation.
I think the paper was written. I think the paragraph that you're probably looking at on page 91, I believe that was added after the paper was first written. To be quite honest, I would probably have put that paragraph in brackets and called it, it's in effect what I would call, if I write a paper, I'd call it an afternote, because it's after the date of the paper, but it is still current. And it was felt that without that afternote, we were not presenting a situation that would be accurate for this meeting today and the executive meeting tomorrow. I do understand if you consider it an unsatisfactory situation, I accept that. I would prefer, though, that we had something in here as an explainer. I just think it should have been in brackets. Thank you.
Thanks, it's just confused me, obviously, so I'm sure it will others as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Seep.
Well, if I could just add something to Councillor Lation's point. At the Working Party Committee, whatever we're calling that, what's a good thing, the board, there were a key thing was, firstly, the very positive engagement from government. Although they're spending other departments' money, the arts and culture, media and sport were clearly positive and trying to find an arrangement. However, it is extremely challenging because their money is in this year, and we would have to reach commitment within this year, or get a ministerial direction to hop over their year. So it's a high fence in the way, but I know a lot of effort is going in to try and meet that. What I was actually going to pick up was Councillor Chilcott's point, or a theme related to Councillor Chilcott's point. Could we please, in the reporting of budgeting, make it clear that we're talking about the commitment date? Because there's a very big difference between the commitment date and the spend date. We do tend to pay for things after they've been delivered, whereas we have to start our MRP and start assuming the money has gone from the moment we make the decision. And that does affect the Treasury position, which of course is a source of great opportunity for us, but also means that, if we're looking at savings against items caused by slippage, we need to understand that if a decision has been made, that money is committed, versus if a decision hasn't been made. Sorry, we may still have the money in our bank, so we may not have actually paid the bill associated with the slipped money, and those are quite key to our treasury management.
Councillor Laishon.
There's a further complication in the capital papers for me, which is where town deal projects involve council-owned assets, because do they belong in regeneration under a certain directorate, or do they then, if they're, say, a sports and leisure hub, do they then come out of regeneration and go into the communities directorate? And we've got a place, one line on this paper where a project has come into communities, although the money is probably still in regeneration. And I think that those, as we work through into the next financial year, we need to be really clear which lines we have these projects on as we spend the government's money.
I'll take one final comment from Councillor C.
Yes, if I could just respond to that. I don't know about the rest of the committee, but my gut feeling is that it's the delivering department that is responsible for the spend. And traditionally, you would expect to see the capital in the regeneration, because there's normally a developer going, and it's us, and then the communities become the operator immediately after handover. In the same way as our education department builds a school and then hands it to an academy. I think we should be consistent.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from members, either in the room or online? I'm not seeing any, so sorry? No, okay. In which case, thank you again for the report. I think members have found it useful. I think the comment was made, I think, by Mr. Bourne, of improving profiling going forward is something that we would all welcome. And again, the comments that we've just had in terms of clarity on capital projects, in terms of whether items are being deferred or actually being stopped, is something that will need to come both out of scrutiny and particularly to the executive as we get nearer to the budget setting point. But if there's no further comments, if members are happy to note that with those comments, Councillor Locke.
Yeah, could I also suggest that you add in there that if you do manage to save a few million from whichever project you're on about there, that it is stated where you plan to spend those millions up front.
I think my guess would be if we're saving money, it's because we probably haven't got it to spend anywhere. But Councillor Laishon.
I know that the town deal and levelling up monies and all the rest of those government funds, they're ring fenced. and they are very tightly controlled. There is an allowance that Michael Gove announced at the LGA conference this summer, where because of the issues in the construction industry, that there is an allowance of up to 30% on a project cost where money can be changed in its kind of nature of expenditure. But if anything wants to come out of one project and go into another, therefore changing the town investment plan, that has to be agreed by government. So there won't be any wiring money from one project to another or from the town deal to levelling up. That is absolutely not allowed. Although we might have wished it were in places, but it certainly is not.
Yeah, I'm sort of slightly, reassured by that. But I mean, when you just talk about a sum of 10 million and you're looking to spend it, keep it in Somerset. I mean, there are a lot of people's minds who take, oh, that's 10 million we can get for this area, or 10 million we can spend in that area. It's, but I'm slightly reassured with what Liz has said there, which I did know myself, actually. I just wanted to state it for the records. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got a late entry into the meeting. Councillor Redman, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. It's only really just a point of clarification. Liz made reference there to capital funds and movement. It's just a confirmation, really. Did I hear right that 30% of any of these government grants, or 30% of a project, could be changed to allow for contingency or for other reasons without having to go back to government?
That was Michael Gove's announcement. It was a while ago now, but if I remember correctly, it was up to 30% of the value of the project. There can be change within where that money sits within the project, as long as the outcomes are the same. My understanding is that officers are being cautious and still making sure that government are aware of any change in any project, so that it doesn't come back to bite us later. But to follow on Councillor Locke's point, money stay in Somerset for those projects, but to deliver the agreed outcomes, not to deliver anything else, the agreed outcomes.
Councillor Redman.
I don't know, just Liz, could you signpost me to that announcement, just so that I can just double check, cross-reference it and understand where it is? It's just because 30% is good, but if it's but you talked about the same outcome. If it's a building project or something like that, there are things that could be cut that could go into that. So I just need some clarification, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Yeah,
will do, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, members, as we said, we'll note that with those comments that were made. So if members move on to the next item on our agenda, which is item 7, which is the HRA account. I've got Kerry Prisco as presenting. Is Kerry with us online?
Hello, Councillor.
Please
Hello, yes. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to give you a brief overview of the Q2 HRA budget monitoring report. So this, just to note, this is a ring-fenced account, and this report looks at the combined position of both the in-house and the Homes and Sedgemoor operations. So the HRA is facing kind of similar issues in terms of general fund, in terms of implementing a new finance system and the economic operating environment, but the HRA does specifically have a lot of risks around regulatory and compliance requirements, especially in the big 7 areas, so gas, electric, water, asbestos, fire safety, lifts and damp and mould, and they are being increasingly scrutinised by the regulator of social housing. In terms of the Q2 position, they're currently forecasting approximately 2 million overspends. If this does happen by the end of the financial year, it can be funded from general reserves, and that will allow the general reserves to still be maintained above their minimum balance requirement of 3.7 million. In terms of why it's forecasting an overspend, the majority of this relates to the responsive repairs service and the voice repairs service. So responsive repairs are just where it's very demand led from the tenants phoning up and kind of requesting a repair in their property, whereas the void element is to do with when a tenant hands in their keys and the property becomes void, and the team needs to go in and bring that property back up to a lettable standard. before we can then re-let that. So they're very much demand-led and reactive based on that, and they're also influenced very much by the condition of the properties being returned for re-let. So the services are experiencing increasing cost pressures with inflation driving up the cost of inflation to do with the construction materials, as we have seen nationally. Excuse me. They've also seen additional volumes of work, so they're reporting approximately 22% increase year to date for this financial year compared to the same period last year for voids, and approximately 31% for responsive repairs. In terms of mitigating that predicted overspend, they have got a number of different activities happening. So they've got something called the Leaving Well scheme. So that is where they aim to work with and support the tenants to leave their homes in a much more kind of suitable manner to help reduce the time and cost of the work to then bring that property back up to reletting. They're also currently going through a procurement exercise. They're testing the market for external contractors to support the void repair service. And they're also doing a comprehensive review of their cost allocation. And what I mean by this is where some costs have to be charged to the revenue account, whereas some costs can be charged to capital. So if, for example, a property becomes void and they go in to do some minor repairs but find that the kitchen needs replacing, well, actually that cost of that kitchen repair can be capitalised and shouldn't be shown as a revenue cost. So we are currently reviewing the transactional data just to see if any of that actually should have been capitalised. Excuse me. To also note that in terms of the pay award, just to let you know that we estimated 5% from a salary point of view for the HRA service, and it has come in on average about 6.1%. So the majority of that was either budgeted for, and the remainder is looking to kind of manage that within vacancies. In terms of the capital programme, as you'll see from the appendices, the capital programme has now been profiled based on best estimates, with Appendix D specifically shows how much they're planning to spend in each financial year. So we're looking at about 45.8 million this year and 76.7 million in future years. And the reason why it's been profiled is because schemes such as a kind of the social housing development schemes, the scheme as a whole, like North Taunton Willowy project, is approved up front, but we know that scheme runs over a number of years. Just to also let you know that from a good news perspective, we've also the service, the council's been successful in being awarded about 5 million grant from Homes England, and that will improve the performance of the HRA because it will help us to subsidise the regeneration scheme for the North Taunton Willowy project and reduce our initial thoughts around how much we'd have to borrow to pay for that scheme. To also note in there as well, there's a 3.3 supplementary budget request for essential fire safety works that's going to go through full council on the 20th of December. So that's already gone through the scrutiny and executive committee, but hasn't yet been to full council. But that's why there's been reference made within the report to that 3.3 million. Hope that's okay, and obviously here to answer any questions if need be.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions around the room? I'm not seeing any, so any online? Not seeing any there either. In which case, I was going to make a couple of comments and questions myself if I can. We're just going to say, obviously, it looks like the reserves are substantial in terms of dealing with what's required this year. Going forward, obviously, we know that rents are controlled so that we can't raise them by more than government allows. So how does that feed through going forward, and are you comfortable that that's something that we can manage? And it's also in terms of the capital grant, also the capital bid schemes that you've highlighted. I just wanted to ask, are those limited to the 2 HRA areas, or are they optional across anywhere within Somerset?
Okay, thank you. So in terms of general reserves, yes, we've got enough reserves at the moment to manage the current year predicted overspends. Looking back at the published report in February this financial year as part of the budget setting process, there is information contained within that report that gave you a kind of forward-looking prediction based on a number of assumptions of what our general reserves position would look like for the combined HRA. From memory, and apologies, I've got this slightly wrong, but from memory, it was about year 8 where we were going to run out of reserves, and as part of the new budget report for 24-25 coming in February, there will be an update on that position, so please do obviously look out for that. Yes, you're right that rents are capped, so again, as part of being very kind of highly regulated, we have a rent policy that we have adopted locally and have to adhere to nationally as well. So where rents could have increased by CPI plus 1% for 23-24, you would have remember that they were actually capped at 7%. We have not had any indication that rents will be capped other than CPI plus 1% for 24-25 at this present time. In terms of the capital programme, at the moment the schemes do relate to the legacy council district areas, so what was Sedgemoor and what was Somerset West and Taunton. I would have to seek advice to come back to you and the committee on whether that could be expanded across the district, the whole county. I don't want to say either way at this point in time.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you very much for that. Any final comments from members? If not, can I thank you very much for the report? If you could also pass our thanks back to the teams at Homes in Sedgemoor and the Taunton in-house team for the works they've done. It's a pretty positive looking report, and it's no with the pressures that you're under as well. Thank you very much for the efforts that have gone into to making it as solid as it is. So thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Members, if we move on then to the next item on your agenda, which is the additional item, well, it's not additional, but it's supplementary in terms of your papers that are on the ModGov. That's item 7A, which is General Fund Revenue Budget and Capital Programme Update. Councillor Leishon, do you want to introduce this, or do you want me to go straight to Mr. Vaughan? It's up to you.
Very briefly, Chair, if I may just say, I think it makes a lot of sense that this paper has been brought into this meeting, because I think without this paper, the asset devolution paper doesn't make as much sense. So I'm really glad to see it here. I think it's one of the most important papers we will look at in our time as councillors, because this is all about trying to find a way to a sustainable Somerset Council. And it's really interesting that this is primarily a budget, therefore a financial report, but it includes within it beginnings of the vision for new Somerset Council. So what I'm now calling the new Somerset Council, because the business case that we've all been working with for One Somerset, of course, the situation has changed so much since that business case was written, that not in every place, but in some places it's superseded. In other places it's clearly not superseded, and that is why we have the asset devolution paper following this one. So I welcome it being here, Chair. Thank you for being able to accommodate it. And over to Jason.
Mr. Vaughan.
Yeah, I'll perhaps it might be easier to talk through the recommendations, just highlight a few things in the report. So the recommendations in paragraph 9 to the report. So this report's going to the executive tomorrow. So any comments from Scrutiny today, we will also feed back tomorrow. So the first recommendation is endorsing or recommending that the report effectively goes to council. You might think that's very strange, but actually that's because of our financial emergency, the position, and taking stuff forward with DLUC. Actually, it's really important that all members really understand our financial position. One of the criticisms of other councils is that when they've hit financial troubles, that a lot of the members didn't know about it. So I don't think anybody in Somerset could be in any doubt around our finances. We have done everything we can, but that's another tick in the box to really show what we're doing. That recommendation also requests that we formally approach DLUC around a capitalisation direction. I have approached DLUC and written to them 3 times now, and I actually have another meeting with them later this week to talk through some of the practicalities of what that actually means. It's not a quick process. It's not a straightforward process. And they are under quite a lot of pressure because of the number of authorities coming forward. So they have now sorted out a contact for us in terms of somebody who's looking after Somerset. So hopefully some progress on that one. The second recommendation is around the consultation engagement process on some of the budget proposals in terms of potential savings and also in terms of council tax. We are, legal requirement around engaging with the business sector, and we are setting up, hoping to do at least 4 of those events across Somerset in different locations over the next couple of months. And the individual service changes, they slightly different depending on what they are. So if it's if I call it an efficiency type of saving of buying less paper clips, we clearly don't need to consult with anybody. If it's a major change to a service that does impact on the public, etc., that's at the other extreme where you need to do full engagement, equality impact assessments, and make sure you go through all of those processes. So all the savings are slightly different depending on what their natures are. Just on council tax, while I'm on that and hot off the press, even my lead member doesn't know this yet. We have finalised the council tax base. That is a delegated decision to me. Just updating the figures. So our current tax base for the current year is that our equivalent of bandy number of properties is 205,674.09. That is increasing to 208,000.96 next year, an increase of 1.13%. What that means based on a council tax increase of 2.99% general council tax and 2% for adult social care will be an additional £2.2 million income for 24-25 that isn't in these papers. So that will feed through to the January update paper. So that is literally hot off the press. The recommendation C in this report is reviewing the earmarked reserves, and there's an appendix listing those out. Obviously, we inherited quite a complex number of reserves from the 5 legacy councils. I would say we haven't completed the work. We've done a first review. We've identified £36.8 million that can be freed up and used to support the budget in its wider sense. We will go back around that loop again because I think there is further that we could free up. And that will be reported back to members in February, but it shows the sort of level that there is there, and it starts to amalgamate those reserves into more meaningful areas as we're one council rather than separate 5 councils. Recommendation D is that there's a further update report to the executive on the 15th of January. That will include more details on the savings proposals, but it will also cover the finance settlement. So we're expecting the finance settlement from government in the next week or 2 at worst. They've got to do it before Parliament breaks up for Christmas, otherwise they can't hit lots of deadlines around consultation processes. The date of it, there's lots of speculation now when it will come out. Nobody really knows the details. We normally get notified a couple of days beforehand because they have to publish what papers they're debating in Parliament. That will confirm how much funding we will get as a council. So it will set out things like the council tax referendum limits, which we think we know from what we were told last year, but it will also confirm all the individual grants. So things like new homes bonus, it will confirm those, as well as things like the business rates and things like that as well. So we think we've predicted our funding reasonably accurate based on the sort of modelling that's done across the piece, but that will confirm it. So that January paper will update on those as well. Recommendation in E here is the vision for a sustainable Somerset Council going forward, and also that we bring a bit of an outline business case to the January meeting as well, adding a bit more flesh to the bones. So in this paper, you've got the vision of what the new council could be in terms of all of that, and that in the January report, they'll have a bit more detail around that as well. And then the final one is to note the capital programme. Excuse me, the bids for new schemes, which we've been reviewing. So this is a point in time paper. It's kind of setting the direction ahead, bringing stuff together. It shows the direction of travel. So the original gap that we reported to members last month was the budget gap was £100 million. You'll see in this paper it's brought it down to 87. It's moving in the right direction. It's still far too big a number. You've just heard me update one of the figures by £2.2 million. There is live work going on across the piece to update a number of the other figures. That will continue right the way through to council tax setting in February. What is really clear, though, is the council will not be able to balance its own budget on a sustainable way going forward. we will have to do some things in a once-off way, whether that be a capitalisation direction or using our own reserves. And in terms of capitalisation direction from government, just to clarify that, it has to be approved by the Secretary of State. How you fund it is quite the key thing. And it comes back to the question we had earlier from a councillor. You can choose to borrow to fund those. That's what it effectively does. Capitalisation direction allows you to borrow for your day-to-day revenue expenditure. So to cover your adults cost, your children's cost, your waste cost, whatever service, you can capitalise and spread those costs over 20 years. The real issue is if you borrow for them, you then have to have the borrowing costs, which at the moment are 5.5% plus in terms of interest rates. You have to pay a 1% premium on that, so that takes it up to at least 6.5%. And you have to do MRP on that, so minimum revenue provision, and your asset life is over 20 years, so you're talking 5% on top of that. So your borrowing costs are about 11.5%. That is quite a big cost. So you really don't want to be borrowing for the majority of this, which is where it comes back to either freeing up reserves or generating capital receipts. So that's why we're looking at all our assets and saying, actually, over the next couple of years, is there surplus assets we can dispose of? Because that'll be a more efficient way of funding this. I hope that's helpful, Chair, in terms of a brief run through of what is quite a long paper, and I do accept that, but there is quite a lot of detail in here. I think it's important members are aware of.
Do you want to make any reference to the appendix that was circulated later relating to the reserves?
Yeah, so as I said, that appendix on the reserves sets out what we inherited from the 5 councils. It's that first step in amalgamating them into one for the new Somerset Council. It's identifying that we can free up £36.8 million to support the budget. We will come back with further refinements of those for the February cycle as well, because I think there is some more we can free up, but you know, it's at the margins more now rather than it won't be another 36 million, unfortunately.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Councillor Rodriguez.
Two for me. The first one, very easy one. The vision for a sustainable new Somerset Council. Will there be a public engagement process on that as well? Or because I think there was one with the original one for the new council that you did, maybe.
There'll certainly be consultation on the proposed savings, which are clearly a really important part of putting together a sustainable Somerset Council. I honestly don't think we've got time to do a full public consultation. I'm looking at Alan Jones as I say that, because I can see that we're on the tightest of timescales here. And if we were doing this work by choice, we'd do it over 3 years. And we're going to take ourselves from now till February the 20th to do the work towards budget setting. And then we're going to look to deliver that vision of the new Somerset Council, new, within a financial year, because that is what we have to do. And we have to do it because of the impacts of inflation, interest rates, and everything else, fair cost of funding exercise, everything else that we've revisited again and again. We are on an incredibly tight timescale. I don't think anybody would choose to do this. What I think is really interesting is what I'm hearing from other councils, where other councils are maybe not putting their heads above the parapet at the same time as us and acknowledging the scale of the challenge. They're not far behind us. And I think there will be great interest in how we pursue this piece of work, this programme of work, because it will be an ongoing programme. And my personal view, for what it's worth, Chair, is that council tax does not work as a primary funding mechanism of social care. It's unequal, it's unfair, it does not allow a council to respond to the demand that it has in its council area, and it is dependent too much on historical decisions that we cannot change in current times. So there are councils that have changed their council tax levels. So there's both council tax base, that's what Jason's just been talking about, and then council tax rates. If you have a look at Somerset, our council tax base is not as low as some places, where Nottingham, for instance, is 80% A and B properties. We're about 65% A to C properties. But our rate is low because it was set low in 1993. We had 6 years of council tax freeze. We're going up by the maximum we can go up, including the adult social care precept, but we can't get to the level we need to be at in order to pay for the increasing demand, the increasing cost. And this is the bit that needs to be said delicately, is that there is, for me, an obvious correlation between areas where a council tax base is low, whether or not its rate is low, and the demand for social care on that council. So as far as I'm concerned, and I think other people in the country understand it as well, council tax does not work as a primary funding mechanism for local councils. What we or any government can do about that is another question altogether. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Chair,
I'll come back to you, Councillor Rodriguez, but just going to see Mr. Jones, whether you wanted to comment at all in addition, or you're happy?
Happily, Chair, just to add to Councillor Leishon's points in terms of the overall proposals and the, if you like, engagement in them. The proposals that are set out, or sorry, the scope that's set out in that vision document are drawn from the council plan. So they are effectively, if you like, the articulation of what that would look like in terms of delivery, but also those areas of search for identifying how we would make savings through a workforce transformation programme and how we would find those efficiencies. And that's what it's intended to do, to set those parameters. Clearly, it can be debated through executive and obviously through this committee as well, provide that input and engagement as part of that. But the overall scope in terms of that doesn't necessarily change. Any specific proposals around services or those activities, clearly they'll go through a separate process, but then ultimately combine into that wider transformation piece. The difference would be, and Councillor Leishon set this out very well, effectively we are running this in parallel because we have to. We wouldn't be doing this way, doing it normally, but we have to run it in parallel in order to ensure we've got the efficiencies delivered in a timely fashion and that we're able to set that sustainable budget for the authority moving forward. But the idea and the principle behind that vision statement is to set those guiding principles that again enable us to act on where we would make those efficiencies across the organisation. So it's very deliberately drafted to that intent for consideration at executive tomorrow. Councillor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. The second one was on that appendix. Just for clarity, really, I haven't had too long to read it, so perhaps just to answer my question. So on the earmarked reserves, it says that you've got 36.8, which has been identified can be repurposed to support the 24-25 budget. Can you just tell me how that appendix that was added in, where it shows that 38 odd million pounds? Because I'm having difficulty in finding that 30 odd million in that appendix.
Yeah, I think the problem is there's a second appendix that isn't here as well. It should be here. It's on the executive tomorrow. There's two appendix, one of them showing this, and there is a further one as well showing the amalgamation. So it looks like you've only got one of them here, but it is on. Give me 2 seconds. I thought it was on a line in here actually.
Is the amalgamation of reserves the one that we had at executive in September? There have been a number of iterations of the list of reserves, haven't there?
It's on line 42. I've just spotted it. I was struggling to see it. I didn't have it big enough font. MTFP support. You'll see it there. Fund satisfied for shortfalls in budgets. 36.804.7. It's line 42.
So can I just to clarify then that we don't have any detail as to what that actually is that 36 million, which projects or?
I think the paper that precedes this that you would probably want to look at side by side is the outturn papers from September from all 5 councils, where you could see all of the reserves under the council headings, so by SDC, SWT. So if you wanted to look at them and ascertain exactly where each reserve had been repurposed, that's where that report was seen. It was in September at the executive meeting. If Jason's already said that this work will be continuing, and I think, Chair, it's really important that we understand that, because there are officers from all 5 predecessor councils now working at Somerset Council who carry that corporate memory, who know what those earmarked reserves were for, and that we absolutely need to make sure that nothing is forgotten that then comes up 6 months later with somebody saying, what happened to that reserve that we'd put back? And I've looked through all of these lines, but it's a serious and ongoing piece of work. A, making sure that we repurpose what we can, and B, making sure that we hold on to truly earmarked reserves that are needed for specific tasks.
So, Mr. Vaughan, if we could just for clarity, in terms of what we're looking at with that appendix, it's telling us there's about 114 million of earmarked reserves, which are council earmarked reserves, and about another 130 odd million, which we're holding on behalf of other people, which then gets you to this 246 million. But more than half of that obviously is not ours.
Yes, that is correct. So if you look at the very bottom bits there, the list that we're holding on behalf of others, such as the LEP, Somerset Rivers Authority, the ICB, Section 256 funding, all of those elements are all separated out. They aren't money that I can go and spend tomorrow because I don't have authority to them. You know, schools balances, those sorts of things as well. So yeah, and as Councillor Lashon says, this ties back to the statement of accounts that were approved by audit committee and now subject to audit from the 5 individual councils. Is brought them all into one place, and this analysis here is what we've brought them all together to being into one set of reserves. But there is more work to do on these to just go through and make sure that we've got everything tied down. So the totals all tie back to everything that was in the individual 5 councils, but there is more refinement. My challenge on each of these reserves is that still required, or can we repurpose it? So that's why we've got to the figure of £36.8 million. I'm hoping that can become higher. We can challenge some of these other ones on here as well.
And just to give us some idea in terms of time scale of that challenge, so is that likely to come back in a month's time with the budget, or is that a couple of months? Because beyond that, we need, because by then we've hit the date where we're setting the budget anyway. So
yeah, it'll be completed so we can set the budget in February. So it's in February, which is actually not that many weeks away now in reality.
Rodriguez, anything further? Or
no, I must have just misunderstood the thing, because I thought I was going to find out what the particular projects were, but clearly not.
Councillor Seaver.
Mr. Vaughan came up with the rather extreme cost of financing your capitalisation directive using the Public Works Loan Board. The Public Works Loan Board also includes other kicks in the tail. Is there an early settlement fee or premium on that particular form of refinancing? Because clearly disposing of assets takes time, and it's likely to be after we've committed to a loan that we are able to sell the asset, which might pay off the loan.
Yes, with any Public Works loan bill, there is now a additional cost of coming out of those early, but the charges, because you're under a capitalisation direction, are quite clear. Of you are borrowing, you can only borrow from PWLB. It is at PWLB rates plus 1%. Although there is one council that didn't have to pay that, so that is something we will challenge with DLUC on as well. And in terms of that spread of those costs to your accounts, regardless of how long you borrow for, whether that be 2 years or 50 years, you have to spread it over the 20 years set out by government as part of the MRP part of it. So part of the issue for us is you'd make the decision to borrow as late as possible, effectively. So you've got more certainty around your asset disposals. And I think the other thing is, I think the general view is we're expecting interest rates to drop at some stage. You know, the direction of travel is downwards rather than upwards on interest rates. So you'd want to push that back as late as possible.
I'm slightly more confused than I was a moment ago. So is there the option to pay back early, even though you've set out on a 20-year loan? Is there the option to pay back early on a loan for that purpose?
You can borrow over whichever period you like in terms of what you're charging to your account. So if you're borrowing, is spreading the cost of the loan in terms of how it hits you is over 20 years. So actually how long you actually borrow for is a treasury decision, nothing to do with how it hits your accounts effectively. So in terms of the capitalisation direction, you are really boxed in of how you are doing it. You are spreading those costs over 20 years at interest rate plus 1%. It's not done there to help the councils, if I describe it as that. There is a bit of punishment here in terms of that 1% premium and maximum spread of 20 years.
Chairman, I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
just one thing again, just to make clear in my mind. I think what we're trying to get hold of was if we got to a position where we had funding that was available before that end of that 20 years, can you actually cut it short and pay it back if the interest rate is that high and you wanted to reduce the costs? I presume we're talking about a penalty, but are they saying you cannot pay it back, or you can, but you're going to get penalised for it?
Yeah, so in terms of that, you can do, yes. What I'm saying is, if you had, I'd say, a 50-year loan, which you can do, or a 2-year loan, how you calculate your MOP and the cost that actually hit your revenue account is over the 20 years. It's only if you didn't have the debt at all. So that's the place you want to be, is not having the debt at all.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, cancellation.
Jason will correct me if I've got this wrong, but it looks to me like there's three kind of profiles here. There's the profile of the expenditure that delivers the transformation. There's the profile of disposal of assets, and there's the profile of potential borrowing. And those three are going to need to be very, very carefully managed, along with the treasury management activity. It's three profiles though, isn't it? It's not just income and expenditure. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands up in the room at the moment, but I have certainly got one online. So, Councillor Chilcott.
Yes, thank you. For me, it's just following up on the question around reserves, really. For me personally, and I know I've banged on about reserves for a long, long time now, it'd be really helpful in one paper and in one place to have the previous reserves when all the councils came together, the current reserves, and which reserves you are reducing or taking out in order to utilise them to, for example, help balance the budget. I'm not clear on all of that, and I know it's been across several papers, but I think it's quite a big movement of funds, and there may be some things we're able to do or not do when those funds are moved around. So I would actually welcome that. I don't mind if it's offline, but I think some clarity on that I would certainly find helpful. And I know I've had several conversations about this over the last 12 months. Thank you.
I think that's following up on Councillor Rodriguez's point, but yes, are you able to provide that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what the big spreadsheet does, that tracks it from the 5 individual councils, lists those individual councils, have they then been amalgamated into the list before you today, etc., etc. So happy to share that with you, Mandy, offline if that's easier. Yeah, there's a lot of detail there, but yeah, happy to share it.
And thank you. Just my second question is, has a risk analysis been done of any of those movements? That would be helpful to know as well. I don't know if it's on the risk register anywhere. Thank you.
So in terms of, has there been an individual risk analysis on each of the individual reserves, I would say no. There has been on the reserves as a whole, but part of the work in dealing with everybody around whether we can repurpose those reserves has been to understand what the nature of those reserves were. I mean, they do vary. Some of them were across the piece funds that were already set aside for balancing the MTF piece. They were really straightforward. You just add those together. Some of them were for particular projects within an individual council. Some of them, like the insurance funds where we self-insure, etc., actually our assessment would be that you can't repurpose those because the risks of doing that are too great. So they've been done as a whole rather than individual sort of risk analysis, but that has been part of the considerations of how much can we actually repurpose. So it has been taken into account.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I've got Councillor Govia online.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask, can't already. I do apologise, but I'm just wondering when the budget is set in February, is it will be in-year savings to be made going forward?
Can I just pause you for a minute? You might want to try turn your camera off because you're breaking up really badly here, and it might just help with the data. If you go back to just audio, that'd be good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
That seems to be a bit better.
So my question was, my question was about in-year savings. The reason I'm asking this is doing a lot of development to put our precept in, and I was just wondering whether if we set a precept, is at some point next year the Somerset Council going to come back and say cover a service or that service and that sort of thing, because that's the difficulty we're finding at the moment around deciding what our own budget at level will be. Thank you.
I think, Councillor Govey, you were breaking up a bit, but I think the essence was for parishes and towns to set their precepts, they need the clarity. I think that's what but I think that might come up potentially in the next paper because Ms. Skirton is going to make that clear to us, hopefully. But if you can bear with us on that one, we will come back to that in the next paper.
Yeah, that's fine, Chairman. Thank you very much. Yeah.
No worries. Thank you. Any other comments or questions from members? I've got a couple, if I could just quickly, in terms of page 12, I think it is on our supplementary paper, where it's talking about the development of the options for the budget options. Just wondering how that's being prioritized in terms of which options are the most desirable and or deliverable. So for example, in terms of services that need to be looked at, there's one of the items is service levels is looked at. Is that being looked at as a priority over ceasing services altogether, so that we would look at how we balance services rather than pulling out all together? And also the other question I was going to ask, in terms of savings delivered, previous years, do we know proportions of savings that we've actually delivered and what you're building in for success rate in terms of what's going forward next year? Because delivering 100% of everything is not always necessarily going to be doable.
Yeah, so in terms of, I'll pick up the savings ones first, in terms of deliverability. It's part of the budget monitoring report, actually, the month 6 one that you had in front of you. We do track them once you approve them at council. So that total saving was £40.9 million. There are some at risk in there, so we're tracking those through. In terms of therefore then building new savings into the budget for next year, we will have to make an assessment of how much we actually think we can deliver of the savings. That will influence two areas really. One is what contingency do we hold in the budget? At the moment, that is £6 million. That's usually to cover non-delivery of savings and things like pay awards and things like that, which are corporate costs that you have to make an estimate on, and you get those right or wrong, etc. So the level of contingency that we have is, approximately 2% of our net revenue budget at the moment. We'll need to assess that depending on the risks on the savings. So if we have a really ambitious savings program, we will need to look at the contingency and perhaps up that. The other area that will affect is our general level of reserves. So at the moment, we've set the minimum level, excuse me, at £30 million, which again is quite a high figure in terms of that compared to some other councils, but that reflects the risks that we got. So assessing our savings, and one of the analyses we do is we get to clarify what's low risk or high risk savings, is trying to work that through to actually understand the risk we're taking. We can't build in 100% of the savings. I think records show that you don't achieve that, so you need a fallback to cover those things. And like I say, in the current year, that is part of the monitoring report that we've done. I think the area we'd flag up where we haven't achieved the base savings is around the LGR staffing costs. The 9.4 of those, there was £1 million in the current year, 4 million profiled into next year. We haven't achieved those. The mitigations have been, we've been holding lots of vacancy posts. So we'll make the overall saving from the council, but we haven't made it on a permanent basis yet because we haven't done those staffing restructures. So monitoring is really important, because if you're not going to achieve them, what's the other actions you're going to take to offset that?
And in terms of the prioritising of savings?
I think, Chair, that there's really interesting conversations ahead. I've heard that one of the things that Birmingham Council has been looking at is what does it actually mean to be a statutory service? And is it the service, or is it the level of service, or is it the outcomes from the service? And I think that is something that more and more councils will be looking at. I think my personal view is that we need to consult as much as we are able to consult on as many options as possible, so that people in Somerset have the best opportunity to let us know their thoughts. None of it is going to be easy, and none of it is going to be what anybody wants to do. So there will be nothing desirable in there at all. The things that will probably cause least concern, as they did last February, are the things that are back office savings, where you don't actually see services. This is a really delicate time to be trying to propose savings, because we all know that we've just gone through LGR, that we've just put 5 councils together, that each of those councils had different priorities and different ways of delivering services. That does mean that there are some savings ahead. Some of those will come in the next year, 24-25, where some of them are attached to contracts. They may come in later years, 25-26 and onwards. It's going, if anybody tells you, Chair, that it's a really complex situation we have at the minute, I think I'll agree with them. It is really, I find it really difficult to keep track of all of the papers that are coming forward. When we've got all of the statement of accounts signed off by the external auditors, and we have all these reserves together, and we can get to a stage where we set a budget in February, I'm not saying it will be any easier, but it may be a tiny bit easier to understand. It is a very complex picture at the moment. Thank you.
I think it's going to be evident, obviously, once we get to the stage of the more detailed, granular level of savings, then I think you're going to see a lot of engagement across the board, both as members and the public at that stage. And just as a sort of slightly throwaway remark, but the back office is obviously where we always start. But at some point, the back office still has to be strong enough to maintain those front-serving services, which is going to be the challenge that we face going forward. Councillor C.
I think just for the public record, we should remind ourselves the back office is very much the smaller lever of a number of levers that are being pulled by society and the environment at the moment, and that it's the care services which dominate.
No, absolutely. I've got no further comments or questions from members. So again, if members are happy that we note the information that's been given to us, we've obviously raised the issue of the information to be supplied that's relating to the reserves and how they've moved. I think it would be useful, actually, Mr. Warren, if that can be circulated with all members of the committee, not so that the members have all got access to that. And again, we will have further information coming to our next meeting, which we'll make further comments on. But thank you very much. interesting times ahead, I think, is the Chinese curse, isn't it? So, thank you. Members, moving on then to our next item, which is agenda item 8. And this is relating to our asset and service devolution. I don't know who wishes to introduce. Councillor Buck-Phillips, sorry.
Yes, if I can just briefly introduce the asset and service devolution framework in its current draft form. The devolution of assets and services was a key part of the One Somerset business case, and it remains a key priority for Somerset Council, particularly as we seek to address the challenges that we have been discussing today. We're bringing this draft to the Scrutiny Committee at this stage, giving an opportunity over the next few weeks for the feedback we receive both from here and from the City, Town and Parish Council sector, which has been circulated with a copy of it as well, so that we can take on board the feedback from here and from there and bring it back to the executive in January is our plan. I've got Sarah Skirton here in person, who will take her through a little bit more. We've also joined by Scott Weech online, and if we really need to turn to him, Alan Jones is sitting next to me.
Thank you very much. Ms. Skirton, do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping my colleague Scott is online and is able to just share a few slides. It is only a handful of slides, but just to support the discussion. The context really is quite important here. As Councillor Buck-Phillips has said, devolution has been a really important part of forming this council. It predates, it was part of the LGR work stream. And a lot of the work on this framework was started then and developed then. And we did have engagement with the City, Town and Parish sector through the Society of Local Council Clerks representative as that document developed. You probably are aware as well, there was a pilot with Bridgewater Town Council, which is progressing. One thing the pilot did tell us is that this is complex and resource intensive. And our approach at that time, if I go back sort of 4 or 5 months ago, was very much about taking it in stages, being very, very measured, working through the framework and potentially inviting a few expressions of interest for further programmes of devolution. I think it's fair to say that the current financial situation has meant that we need to accelerate some of those conversations with our sector, but we still felt that it was vital that we had a framework to do this within, particularly around ensuring that we have the appropriate governance, principles to work within, and steps that we need to go through, including that wider engagement. If I go to the, sorry, Scott, I'll go to the next one. So these are the principles that we have within the framework, and we think that they still stand, but obviously welcome members' feedback. Very much that our approach should be co-produced, so we should be working with city, town and parishes, but also community groups, because this isn't exclusively for that sector, it's for any organisations that may wish to have a dialogue with the council about taking on assets and services or having a greater influence on them. Key principle for us has always been that devolution needs to make sense, it needs to be sustainable, you need to know that you're doing it with a good chance of success. And be clear about the benefits to the particular community that is being served by the organisation. And the final point really is it must align with the strategic priorities of this council. Some of the advantages of working with the community, we know this, I think everyone on the table knows this, it's that local knowledge and their ability to tailor activity accordingly. For example, there could be an asset that the council owns, but the local community could have more influence over it and get greater use out of it by understanding what local people want to use that for. They have that ability to mobilise their communities and bring together different groups. And there is that flexibility around local precept raising, but we understand that that also is causing some concerns for our colleagues through our recent dialogue with them. I'm going to pass over to Scott in a minute, but just to say that we really are bringing this to you as a draft for comment. We'd very, very much welcome feedback from this committee as well as from our stakeholders with a view to developing it further to bring to executive early in the new year. Scott, if I could hand over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Apologies, I'm having a few problems with my with presenting at the same time, but hopefully we'll get there. So some of the outcomes of devolution are around. Apologies, let me actually share my screen this time. Are we any closer to sharing my screen?
We're not seeing. Oh,
there
we are.
There we are. My apologies. Problem between the chair and the screen. So some of the outcomes of devolution are obviously influencing and monitoring joint and enhanced delivery. So in this instance, that could mean, for example, that we provide a current level of service, and we work with the sector to produce a level of service that actually is what's desired in their local area. Agency agreements, obviously, as the next one. Delegated authority, so that is where we would pass on some authority and tasks into the community, and obviously outcome 5, full transfer of assets or services. So you know, that could be things like public toilets or open spaces, typically, or the assets themselves within our communities. I'll just go on to talk about some key risks and then some dependencies and next steps. So obviously, at the moment, our key risk is our financial alignment and making sure that financial savings targets are realised at an early opportunity, but also that those devolution opportunities are fully realised at an early stage. There's a risk of mismatch of expectations. Clearly, what our community want and what we're able to provide, and the offerings and timescale of delivery needs to align. And that really is closely aligned with our resource capacity, whether we're able to do things well and in a timely fashion. A key risk is around our towns, parishes and councils, town parish councils, whether they have the ability, the wherewithal in the widest sense, to be able to take on some of these roles. There is a key risk, that final one there, which we shouldn't underestimate, around communities taking on services unprepared and unsupported. So we really do need to work in partnership with the sector to be able to successfully devolve those services. And we've got some models to be able to do that, which includes sort of the sector taking on assets over and services over a period of time. So not a straightforward line in the sand, but perhaps a buyback scheme or something like that. There are some key dependencies. Obviously, our capacity within across the piece. We know we're really stretched at the moment, and the capacity in each of those areas to be able to give the right support and guidance. And then the role of our local community networks. Obviously, they're very new to us as an organisation, and particularly to the communities themselves, but they need to have the ability to support the drive through the city, town and parish councils to explain what they want as a locality. Just understanding really and acknowledging that there might be some GP arrangements, there might be some staff affected by potential arrangements, and also that our corporate priorities and our new council is still really emerging and evolving, and it's changing at pace, as we've already discussed today. And just acknowledging again that capacity, capability and competence within the sector to take on potentially complex issues. And then finally, just sort of some next steps. So this framework obviously needs to follow the democratic pathway, and we've got a pilot with Bridgewater, which we need to take to completion. We've got some single points of contact in amongst our service directors who are engaging with specific towns and parishes, so the larger towns typically with existing interests that we're able to develop quite swiftly. And in amongst that, Councillor Evans has sent out a letter to the sector asking for their help, and we are triaging those responses as they come in and writing and meeting with those towns and parishes individually to try and understand and develop a pipeline of activity beyond the immediate kind of financial crisis. And obviously we would look to wider engagement once we're structured to do so. I will just acknowledge that there is some application stages that we are expecting to go through, but that needs to develop over time, and ask if there are any questions from that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Wilkins first, and then I've got Councillor Sieb, and then Councillor Hobhouse.
I fully understand that time scale is very difficult to bring about at this point, but it would be highly useful for our towns to know, towns and villages and parishes to know that you're doing the work on the time scale, so that they can understand how soon they will be able to understand when they will be looking into particular assets, at least start dates for that to happen. And I fully appreciate your staffing issues, but I think that's a piece of work that does need to be done. Okay.
Councillor Sieb, I think yours was in similar vein. Do you want to raise at the same time?
Directly related to that, Chairman, and I just want to remind yourself and members that I have declared interest in this matter. I'm on 2 parishes, but I'm also a director at SALC. In that context, we had a wide discussion around this topic, very usefully facilitated by Somerset Council at the SALC AGM at the weekend. And the one, it's a comment that relates to Councillor Wilkins' point, really, and you might want to elaborate. The paper doesn't actually clarify priorities. My understanding, based on what parishes were saying to us at the meeting, was that there is some confusion over what's a priority and is this all short term for this year? And the quite reasonable response by the leader was, if you think about it, some parishes will already own the village hall, will already own the playing fields. The roads and the verges will remain legal, and we're not likely to be asking them to actually take over white lining and other similar things. So it's going to be very much business as usual, unless this framework really gets going. Those are also the parishes that are likely to be most worried, because they don't know what the time's going to work into, and they don't know what to allow for in the forthcoming year. And they're also the parishes which may have the capacity concerns with respect to the capacity to act legally and take these services on. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got large councils, town and city councils, where the asset transfers are likely to be very significant, and significant in the short term for our financial situation at the council as well. So naturally a priority. And it seems to me that it would have been useful to actually try and put some sort of rational priority into the paper, because at the moment I fear we've scared the horses, and actually a few calming words might be worthwhile.
Let's go.
Thank you. I'll try and respond to both of those. In terms of timescales, it has been a bit of an emerging picture, because the responses that we've had to Councillor Revan's letter, as Scott alluded to, have been triaged. Some of them are comments, some of them are actually, we don't feel like we're in a position to engage at this time. Some of them are, well, we've been waiting to do this for ages, so can we crack on? So we've been working across the council with other service directorates just to look at what we might be able to move forward and in what time frame. We absolutely recognise we need to relay that back to the sector. To some extent, it is work in progress, but we are looking to write that to city, town and parishes, hopefully later this week, following tomorrow's executive meeting. We do engage regularly with the sector, so we have the fortnightly clerk sessions, and one last week was an extended session for an hour which was Q&A around devolution. And we will repeat that as required. And I myself have attended SLCC AGM, and I was also at Salk's AGM on Saturday. So that's incredibly valuable to hear what colleagues in the city, towns and parishes are saying and what their concerns are. So we will keep that communication going. I think it's a really good point about whether we can put something in the framework before it goes to executive that it aligns with the MTFP decision-making process, so that our stakeholders can see what can happen in what sequence. At the moment, it's inevitably a bit iterative, because until decisions have been taken on specific services that may need to be reduced or stopped, we don't exactly know what the impact is. It's more, where might the interests lie? What is the art of the possible? So there's a bit of matching of expectations. So the thing that we're really focusing on now is that engagement and keeping that dialogue open, and also that effective triaging. There will very soon be some frequently asked questions on the council's web pages, the city, town and parish web pages, on some of the more general questions that we are being asked, and we will build on that, but it won't substitute for the direct contact either. Thank you.
Can I just ask one query in respect of the same sort of subject? Obviously, there's a whole range of towns, parishes and city across the county, and they'll have different capacities. There is a concern, I think, that some are worried that if you put out services to certain areas, that they would devolved, whether there's a critical mass left in the centre that would be able to work with those parishes that aren't big enough to take it on themselves. Are we sure that we can manage that process?
That, Chair, is a very real consideration that's coming up from colleagues as well as from the sector. So there's almost that understanding of how these requests map out across the whole of Somerset. There's also dialogue with some of the bigger towns who are offering, and we're not stepping in there, that's we encourage or not, but they're offering to act as hubs for perhaps smaller councils. In fact, some of the bigger parishes are looking at that as well. But we do need to keep an eye on equity of provision. It may well be that decisions are such that it will be difficult to have that equity provision, but we need to understand that, and we need to be able to be clear on that. So yeah, there's that kind of mapping of it geographically as well as thematically that we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a number of councillors indicated. So I've got Councillor Hobhouse, Rodriguez, Locke and Trimble in the room. So Councillor Hobhouse, start please.
Thank you very much indeed. In my division, we flooded again today. We're going to flood again on Thursday and Friday. I have blocked drains. I have blocked units where they go in. On May the 9th, when we had a major flood, we had severely good support from the ex-South Somerset team. I have two major problems with what's going on at the moment. The first is that we've got a complete restriction on highway expenditure for obvious reasons. I have parishes that are willing to spend the money, but nobody will tell me how much it costs to hire in a jetter. Nobody will tell me what the liability is. Nobody will actually decide whether or not my flooding villages, as I came through, I visited them today, can have any help. And they are willing to pay for it. Now, we either need to get, excuse my language, our arse in gear or back off, because at the moment, they're getting angrier and angrier.
Chair, I'll try and respond. I'm not a highways technical expert, so I'm looking at one of my colleagues. One of the areas that we are thinking about discussing with the sector is the highway steward model, and whether that's something that city, town and parishes might want to buy into. So more detail on that to follow, but I don't know where it begins in terms of what a highway steward can do versus the statutory responsibilities.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chair. So just to add, I think we recognise and the concerns of communities, particularly as a result of some of the pressures that are there and the pressures that are placed on budgets. The proposal, sorry, the scheme that's been working in the Exmoor area, which is the highway steward, was a pilot to understand what the issues are now. Clearly, given the budget concerns that we have, it's very difficult to promote that into next year. However, it is something we would like to promote to parishes, towns, city, town and parishes as an option of dealing with those, what the service would describe as low tech issues and concerns, and rather than an individual price list, moreover, an ability to task an individual with the tools and approval to work on the highway and work on the highway at speed, but at the complete control and discretion of the towns and parishes within which they work. That's proved to be incredibly successful in the Exmoor area, not only to deal with those low-tech issues, dirty signs, block gullies, those sorts of things, but also to kind of help augment the delivery program, and that's been of huge value. Equally, we know that towns and parishes have benefited from Lensman, and I do appreciate slightly outdated term now, but we know that they've had success. So we're sharing examples across, or will be sharing examples across city, town and parish council colleagues to show what those sorts of things cost and what the implications could be to benefit those as well. And then the final picture, which is part of our new highways contract, is also developing a parish price list, dealing with precisely the issue that's been raised. Regrettably, we are ending one contract and beginning another, so a price list is not feasible at this point in time. But the intention is to make available exactly the type of price list that's being referred to by Councillor Hobhouse, so that there is a suite of opportunities for parishes, towns and the city to buy into. Equally, as part of that, we'll look to understand what licensing is required to allow the same group of local councils to work on the highway as they see fit. There are significant liabilities and insurances that are required for that. However, we hope that by providing that price list, it gives the option to buy into a service that's there. So I'm afraid that's not a complete response, and I do appreciate that, but hopefully that gives you a feel for the sorts of things we intend to include this week in the correspondence with local councils, but also in the future as we develop, because it isn't a once and done. Councillor Hobhouse.
Thank you for that reply. We also flooded on the 1st of October. And I brought up the problem with liability with the leader at that time, asking if we could produce gangs that could go round and alleviate the flooding problem. I'm now the 1st of November. I apologise. Now the 4th of December. I'm about to flood again on the 6th and the 7th, and we know it's going to happen because the CAM is within 6 inches to a foot of the top of its banks, and yet I cannot get, I can get you 4 or 5 parishes who, if they had access to the labour force that was at South Somerset, would hire it in tomorrow to get the job done, which gets over their liability as the parish. Can we organise something like that, please, so that the parishes, and I'm not talking about next year, I'm talking about next week.
Mr. Jones, I think obviously it's something we can't resolve necessarily here, but I think we do need, if an answer can be returned to Councillor Hobhouse, that we can get something moving, because it's an instance in one particular area, but that's being repeated across the county at the moment where there are real issues on flooding. Mr. Jones.
Through you, Chair. We will take that away and discuss it with our operational colleagues to understand what is and isn't available on that basis in terms of that additional support. Thank you.
Because again, as Councillor Hobhouse said, there's a keenness to do something out there, but equally people don't want to find that they've done something that then causes them a liability going forward. So if that can be followed forward, and if you can just notify us, that would be really helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, officers. Bye.
If I take Councillor Locke, and then I've got Councillor Rodriguez. So Councillor Locke.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Firstly, I want to say that I belong to an authority that has had a presentation from your officers, and for my colleague, Councillor Seed, to say nothing is going to change, it's business as usual, to quote his words, I think that's a little bit of a misunderstatement, because things are going to change. We're all in a position which we didn't think we was, which we didn't envisage 12 months, 2 years ago. We've got a few weeks to sort ourselves out. I do have a question at the end of it, and I will come in now with my question. I want to know over what period of time you are expecting these authorities to take over any services you may want to devolve down or they may feel that they can't afford to run in the future moving forward. Bearing in mind they have their precepts to make and to set, which they are working on now. And they're not overstaffed. They've got 2 or 3 members of staff, some of the larger councils, not even that. So, I mean, it's a misconception to think that there's staff out there who can work out and do everything at the drop of a hat. Personally, I think this is far too late. I know the situation goes beyond our control and we've got the timeline which we've got to work on as our finance member on the executive and the finance officer tells us we have to. But we have put our parishes in an impossible situation where you are saying now, and your second speaker said, that you are hoping to devolve some powers down and for some parishes to pick up funding through their precept. Then you went on to say about LCNs, to working with the community to come up with projects and that. Well, who's going to pay for that? I mean, we're going to be, if we stave off having to issue a 114, we're going to have tight financial controls on what we spend on the future going forward. You cannot keep asking your parish councils to, because you think they're open-ended with their precepts, to put their precept up. It's not going to take you long before the people out there are going to look up and say to you, all you're wanting us to do is pay more for less, because that is basically what they are doing. Now, I'm not having a go at anyone in particular. We all have to work together, but to think that things is going to be business as usual, it isn't. And the sooner that's realised by a lot of people, the better. But my one question is, over what period of time do you expect those parishes who are able to financially have any services devolved down to them and can successfully run them and finance them, over what period of time do you expect that to take? Do you expect it to be in 2 months? Do you expect it to be in the next 6 months? Do you expect it to be ongoing? Because I'm sure that's one of the questions they would like to know. Thank you, Chairman.
I think Councillor Butt-Philip, you indicated you wanted to comment.
Thank you. And yes, thank you for those comments, Tony. You're absolutely right. A lot of things are happening a lot later than any of us would have wanted. I would say the position that we face as city, town and parish councils, and I'm a city councillor myself, is, much as the situation we face as Somerset Council, it's incredibly challenging, it's incredibly difficult, and we're all going to have to work incredibly hard. But no, it's not impossible. We're not putting anyone in an impossible situation. We're putting people in a very, very difficult situation because we ourselves are in a very, very difficult situation. And what we're seeking to do is find ways that we can mitigate the inevitable response, the inevitable results of the financial situation we find ourselves in. And I know that city, town and parish councils will be able to provide some of the solutions to how we protect many of the services and look after some of the assets that our residents in our communities really, really value and which we are no longer able to continue to provide. In answer to your question about the time frame, the answer to all 3 of the suggestions you made, 2 months, 6 months, and an ongoing process, is yes. Some of these things will have to happen very, very quickly indeed. Some of them will happen over a period of 12 months, 18 months, even longer. There are a huge range of types of assets and types of services which are contained within this framework. Some of them are, for example, tied up with contracts with external providers. So the time frame for those contracts will have to be taken into account. So I can't give you a definitive answer on time frames for the whole lot, but some of it will be very quick, some of it will be very slow.
Thank you. Councillor Rodriguez and then Councillor Trimnell.
Thank you. Just got 2 questions, Chair. Within the document, you referred to lessons from the Bridgewater pilot being incorporated into any consultation response. I just wondered, I may have missed it. Are those lessons yet public, and are parish councils that are considering taking things on aware of those lessons to consider before they even think about what they may wish to take on. The second question is around one of the risks that Scott presented on screen around unprepared, unsupported councils. I have some concern, which no doubt you'll alleviate, around, I'm pretty sure there's one or two eager councils, city, town or parish councils out there who are eager to take on everything or most of which is being offered to them, but potentially not being prepared. I don't know, perhaps they're not, perhaps they are. And I can see a scenario where, considering the financial situation this council's in, of course, this council would want to jump on that opportunity too, understandably. So what I want some reassurance really around that risk, what's being done to ensure that those councils are prepared? How are you proposing to manage that risk? Kind of what does that look like?
Thank you. With regard to Bridgewater, we do have some lessons learned. We have not necessarily made those public, but we would have a conversation with Bridgewater Town Council to see if they were comfortable, because I think that would be almost part of a toolkit in terms of things to be aware of. And we've learnt some things organisationally as well that we would probably do differently. The point about capacity and capability with local councils is really important. It's not fair on anybody to expect an organisation to take something on that they're not going to be able to sustain or manage. That is one of the main reasons why we want this framework. We want that robust governance. We want to have that clear business case for why something would happen and those provisions in place. There are quite often legal implications which need to be captured depending on the scale and size of the devolution project. So absolutely all of that needs to be taken into consideration. In terms of building capacity, so where you might have councils that have the ambition but are perhaps not sure, there is that learning from other areas and support from within the sector, and that's absolutely where we're working closely with SALC, Somerset Association of Local Councils, and the Society of Local Council Clerks, to really join up on how we support the sector who may be interested in taking on assets and services. And I think recognising it goes back to that point about equity. We are not telling our city, town and parish councils that they have to take on anything. It's about having a conversation with them about what they might be prepared to do or work with us to mitigate the impact of cuts that could come. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Trimnell.
Thank you. I also have two questions. I think my first one would be related to the fact that we had flooding yesterday. Coming here today, I couldn't use the A303 because it was closed. I was being directed out through many of our parishes, and I'm looking at the fact that drain jetting, gully cleansing, ditch clearance and all of those things may be services that are at risk of requiring devolution. I think given that there's quite a turnover in some town and parish and maybe the city council, I don't know, of people who are elected and then for various reasons step down. So there can be a bit of a triggers broom at times, and you end up with a group of people working on a town council, taking on responsibility for things that they wouldn't have chosen to before. And they're going to have their own financial constraints as well in terms of staffing. So I just want to know, how do you mitigate concerns? Will town, parish and council, city councils be able to return some of those devolved assets if they find that they no longer have the ability to run them? And are you concerned at all about some of the highway safety risks of things like flooding, where perhaps many parishes are telling me it's because our drains haven't been cleared? The second question is around LCNs, because they're recommended as having an important part to play as a forum, an ideal place to discuss the options. I don't know where I got it from, but I was under the impression it was going to be an item on the LCNs. Now, I know that they set their own agendas, but I would think this being quite an important thing, it would have come up for all of the next LCN meetings, bearing in mind they have precepting in January, but it doesn't appear to be on mine. Was it something that was sort of laid down as something that ought to be covered, or was it something that it was just some parishes wanted to talk and some didn't?
That's good.
Thank you. With regards to the highways side of things, I think I would need to refer that to one of my colleagues who understands more about that than I do. This is another reason why we need to be really careful, because if something is fully devolved, that means it's no longer the council's responsibility. So I'm not necessarily talking about highways, but it could be an asset. So that's another reason why we need to be really, really careful that there is the capacity and capability and sustainability in any arrangements. The little I do know about highways is that there is some training for parishes that SLCC are looking to be able to offer, or with SALC potentially, is it called Chapter 8 training around safety. So there is potentially support there, which we'll find out more about. With regards to local community networks, as far as I'm aware, there's been discussion about the council's financial emergency on every agenda of this round 3 of local community networks, and linked to that has been discussions about what some of those local priorities might be. I think everyone's probably aware that you can't devolve to a local community network, but it's a forum for those discussions about what matters most locally. I know that some of the round 3 meetings don't happen until after Christmas, and I believe that Kate Hellard, my colleague who's leading on LCN development, is looking to bring a virtual meeting of those LCNs to discuss that topic, but I'll ask her to update the committee on the arrangements for that. But I know that the meetings that have happened recently, this has been a key topic of conversation, to the extent, I think Wellington next week, that is their main topic of conversation.
Councillor Trimmel.
Okay. No, I totally understand why. All right. I totally understand why they are not devolved to LCNs. I understand that. I think what I'm saying is the fact that it's saying that they can be a forum, and the fact that you're saying yes, yeah, absolutely, discussion of the current financial situation of the council is on the agendas. But is that surely isn't the same thing as devolution of assets? So that's what I'm a bit confused over. Actually, that's a completely fair point. If we were not in the situation that we are in, then I would say that they are a forum, because actually, if you're looking at your priorities, it could involve devolution of, it could be greater control of local assets or services. So that would be part of an LCN identifying its priorities and what it wants to progress. I think I misunderstood slightly. I thought you meant the here and now, given the financial emergency, and that has been, I think the dialogue has accelerated somewhat at LCNs in that context. But yes, it is that ongoing role of the framework. Yes, LCNs are part of those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, I know it's not your portfolio anymore, highways, but did you want to comment on the highway aspects?
Only in the context of the LCN, so I won't cross the line, if that's okay, Chair. All I would say is I think as part of the LCN discussions, as Sarah set out, it's an opportunity for the LCNs to set their own agenda and clearly set out what their priorities are. But of course, the LCNs, and we've always been clear, and in fairness, the latest correspondence on this point has also identified that it is for the LCNs then to consider how they would brigade themselves together to consider these types of options. And Sarah and her team have set that out quite clearly through those discussions. So it's an opportunity for those parishes that may not have the wherewithal, or there are risks or issues or insurance concerns, for example, the opportunity to kind of band together as part of that. My understanding from the conversation that I've had with Councillor Butt-Philip is that there has been that dialogue across LCNs in terms of the budget position, some challenging conversations I understand around the budget position, but also then setting out how LCNs could collaborate to address some of those concerns. So from a highways perspective, there are huge benefits in that collaboration, because regrettably roads and rivers don't respect parish boundaries on many occasions. So it's how do they kind of work collaboratively to solve that problem. And of course, the costs need to be spread as well as part of any mitigation measures or responses that's put in. So more general response, Chair, I'm sorry, but hopefully that kind of characterises what the discussion that's going on as I understand it with LCNs.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkins.
Yeah, actually on the spread of costs, has there been a piece of work, some advice, or you know, a real piece of work done on parishes that don't precept, that currently precept at the moment? Because obviously they're going to get left behind unless they understand the implications of not precepting. And has a piece of work been done on that? Have they been involved?
Chair, did you want me to respond? So we've been having that discussion through some of the forums because some of the parishes have said that they're not in a position to, or they haven't precepted, or they've kept their precept low. They have been challenged by some of their peers on that. So they've been part of the conversation. I don't have an analysis of which parishes precept or don't, but we could look into that absolutely. But it is down to their local decision. But within the sector, there is that kind of encouraging to think about it if they haven't done it already, or if they haven't increased for a while, to look at what they might want to do locally.
So there isn't a piece of advice from Somerset Council going out to these parishes to explain exactly the position that they are in, and what they could do if they fancy not being in that position.
Indirectly, I think the leader's letter kind of relayed the message about the position, and I think some of the conversations, but it's something we could think about in terms of future comms.
Councillor Seeb.
It was on the non-precepting. I think it's only the parish meetings that don't raise any precept. Based on your numbers on Saturday. But there are a number of parish meetings, and I know one of those refused to contemplate forming a parish council, which would initially have been simply a case of a bunch of district councillors being posted into it pending the first election. But they refused to go down that route at all, even though it would have opened up a few £100,000 worth of grant to get them a water supply. So they were on boreholes that we've condemned.
Thank you. I think ultimately that's going to be a decision that's going to sit with each individual locality to make their decisions. Couple of questions if I could ask before I come to the members who are with us online. You mentioned about the importance of capacity of those taking on services and the ongoing capacity. What's the capacity within our own council to actually deal with all this working out that's going to have to be done very rapidly before we can decide whether these things can be palmed out? Because we're looking at legal, we're looking at the services themselves, going to have to do a lot of work. And have we actually got the time and the resources to do that in the space of time we've got available?
I might look to my colleague to supplement, but from a service director perspective, this has been something that we're moving corporately. Absolutely, we need to make sure we've got that capacity. That's why we're having to triage our responses and what we can realistically take on. In some cases, we don't have a choice other than to look at this and prioritise it at the moment, particularly where it could potentially deliver significant savings or mitigate some of those potential proposals. So that is where we are at the moment, but I won't say that we haven't got a lot of additional capacity. So it's about managing it very carefully and working with colleagues. I think I'd also note that it does fall perhaps disproportionately across services, because it's those services that, you know, you can imagine regs and ops, assets, highways, they're the ones that people have the most interest in. But we do have an internal working group and we are developing this into a programme.
And Chair, if I may, apologies from speaking from the back row, but just in terms of the wider programme, it is actually a work stream that we've identified that needs to be developed in order to make sure that it has that continual focus as services become under pressure as a result of the budget setting process. How do we then have that dialogue across all services to mitigate the impact potentially of those services being reduced, if that's where members choose to set the budget? But equally, as part of that, as a more practical response as well, the intention is to provide some big block, for want of a better expression, concepts around costs. So I've already mentioned the highway steward, for example. So under the new contract, we do know now, as in right this moment, we've just found out what the cost is to operate that across an LCN. So we intend to share that with City, Town and Parish Council, so they are aware of that. As I've already mentioned, the cost of a lensman, setting those costs out, but also the potential for operating assets that may exist in those areas as well. I'm afraid it won't be a complete list, but what it will be is it'll start to address some of the questions and queries that we're getting from certainly city, town and parish council clerks about just tell us something, just tell us a little bit of information that we can begin to consider how we would precept that. And it gives them something then to consider. The smaller parishes in particular are really interested in what they need to consider. Whether they do or not is up to them, but I think it's just up to us to be able to write, and that's the intention that we, through Councillor Philip, intend to write this week, to set out more information based upon the responses that we received so far to the Leader of Council's letter.
Thank you. And one other question, if I could, is I think it was in Mr. Weech's presentation. He mentioned that services and assets may not only be devolved to parish, towns and cities, it could be other bodies. So is there a priority as to who gets first option in effect? Is it offered to the parishes first and then it goes down to other people, or is there a plan as to who comes in for these assets?
Thank you, Chair. There's not a priority. I think it's just likely at the moment that the larger devolution opportunities are likely to be with the town council, should we say, or city councils, with the larger councils primarily. But any organisation could come forward with a proposal and we will consider it through the usual routes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other? Yes, Councillor Soughton, and then I'll come to those online.
Thank you, Chairman. I sat through a rather long meeting last night, an emergency meeting of Yeovil Town Council, to discuss the devolution of some of these assets and services, etc., etc. And there was a whole list there of different services, from parks to play equipment to gullies and hedge trimming and all sorts of different bits and pieces. And we were given a presentation at the beginning of that, and it was emphasised on to us, or to some of the councillors there, that they need to be quite quick on a response to this, and to kind of come back as quickly as they possibly can with an interest in what they may want to take on. Now, within Yeovil, you might know you've got Yeovil Town Council, you've got Brimpton, and you've got Yeovil Without. Now, out of the three there, Yeovil Town Council is by far the biggest, with the biggest precept, I think. Well, yes, it is, without a doubt. But if Yeovil Without or Brimpton, which are closely integrated into Yeovil Town as such, didn't want to take on any services or any assets or whatever, but Yeovil Town did, where does that cross over then, and where are the resources coming to provide for the people that don't want to take over assets? Where are the resources coming for those town and parish councils without having to put their precepts up? Is there anything else to go with that? Are we going to get anything devolved down to us that's going to help pay for some of those services? And what really concerns me is you're asking town, parish and city councils to look at the very same things that they might want to take on. And you've got X number of different authorities doing the same thing. The bureaucratical side of that seems to me mind-boggling, because you could have the Yeovil Town Council doing some hedge cutting, and some gullies and some drainage, and then West Coker might want to do something, and then there's a different. And where do the resources come together, and the practicality of that? This is what really concerns me when we're devolving down these services and these assets, and how it's done fairly. That's really what concerns me.
Ms. Skirton.
Absolutely note the comments. I think I mean, my colleagues that are engaging directly with councils like Yeovil, they know those services and they understand any contractual relationships and what might happen if something was devolved, and what that might have on the neighbouring areas. But it goes back to us really needing to have a clear understanding on that, and I'm not sure we've got that full picture yet. That's part of why we're having the conversations, but it is a very valid point.
And certainly one of the challenges is going to be there aren't always good relations between neighbouring towns, villages, and villages with each other anyway. So they're not always necessarily going to want to work. Some will be very keen to work together. Some will definitely not want to. So, Councillor Seat, comment.
Yeah, yes, Chairman. And I think it's quite interesting that it seems from research in the past that, for example, clustering, the arrangement of multiple councils coming together to actually commission something, is very often initiated by the principal authority or by principal authority councillors rather than by the parishes. So I do take the point. I do wonder if we're getting rather hung up on the word devolution, which I think to some people is clearly a passing down of the responsibility and the powers and so on and so forth, with nothing remaining at the centre. And one of the options in the paper is to commission to actually say, we want better than the base service. You've got irreducible resource, sell us it at cost, and thus assist the council with diluting its overheads a little, and what you get as a parish is a higher level of service, an enhanced level of service within your area, very much along the original Ranger type arrangements for South Somerset. And I do wonder if devolution is dividing us a little by accident, given the scope of the paper.
Yeah, that's a fair comment, I think, but yes.
Thank you. Yes, and just to note a bit around clustering, obviously we'd want local councils or community groups to decide for themselves, but the LCNs, go back to the point about the LCNs, are a forum that's there for us to encourage those conversations, and also recognising that, you know, as we always said, their line's not walls, so it makes sense to collaborate with the neighbouring LCN area. Why not? We're not going to be prescriptive about where those conversations happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move online. So we've got councillors Chilcott, Johnson and Osborne. So Councillor Chilcott, you were up first.
Thank you very much. I think we've left our towns, parish, city councils with an impossible job. For those larger towns, they've been working on a budget for some months now. This is coming in at the 11th hour for them. They don't know how much things are going to cost. They don't know which services are going to be stopped. And I think the frustration is if you decide to fund one service and then find out the rest of the county is going to have that paid for, but another service they're stopping, you probably would have chosen to fund the stop service and not the one that is going to carry on being delivered. So I think it's a real challenge. I would love to have a piece of work done across the country. We've talked a lot about Band D and how much it costs. The larger towns and parishes are paying a lot of money on top of their unitary council precept. And if you add that onto the town and parish council, you know, it's several £100s for some people in Somerset, and that would probably put you way above most of the country. Even if you were collecting a higher amount, I think that'd be an interesting piece of work to do. So the challenge for me is, great that they can have a shopping list, if you like, so they can understand how much the things are going to be cost. I think it will be too late for them to budget for it this year. And we have to remember that within their budgeting, they should be budgeting in the same way that we do to having costs attached to what they want to deliver, and you're asking them to do something that it's impossible for them to do. And I think the other thing is, it's quite clear that whilst they did not cap parish, town, city council precepts, it's quite clear in the guidance that it needs to be reasonable and it needs to be not excessive. And my concern is that if some of the towns and parishes wish to take services on, they will be excessive rises, and especially where you've got families that are struggling at the moment. So I think it's a little unfair on our towns and parishes. I think a lot will do whatever they can to help. And my last concern is this patchwork of services you might end up with in Somerset. And if we just pick something like street cleansing, it is much more economically viable to street cleanse a whole area than rather to do a bit here and a bit there and a bit elsewhere. And my concern is in the longer run that the public purse will be paying more for the same services because you've got several different contracts running across several different parts of the county. So my question is, has that bulk buying element actually been considered when we're looking at what we're looking to devolve? Thank you.
That's good.
Thank you, Chair. I think for me, this is quite detailed away from the framework, but it's really important. And I know that my colleagues, particularly in Regs and Ops, are considering this when they're looking at any local solutions and what it might do in terms of economies of scale and contract viability.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the issue of economies of scale has been raised in a number of forums to say it seems that we're breaking up something that maybe not be working as well, but and that patchwork element of where you happen to be is the level of service. But that is again going to be something I think Councillor Seed made reference to, is it doesn't have to be a necessary devolving of the service. It could be a buying into the service, and that needs to be looked at as an option early on. And as I think Councillor Chilcott just mentioned, that information needs to be going out to the parishes as well, so they know what they need to be either buying into or devolving. Yes, Councillor Lachon.
Chair, I just wanted to make one point, which was that for any parish in Somerset to get to a rate of council tax commensurate with something like Dorset Council, I've no idea how many hundreds of percents they'd have to go up, but it'd be quite interesting to look. It would be absolutely colossal amount. But I also want to make a point, Chair, if I may. In my former life, I ran a theatre and cinema that was funded by its parish council, where it was located. That parish council became more generous over the years as funding stopped from the principal authorities. That didn't actually affect the smaller parish councils around, although the people who lived in the smaller parishes around still had the benefit of the facility that was then funded more by the, if you call it, the home parish council. Now, I know that the people who lived in the smaller villages contributed by buying tickets, but the home parish council was the one that really mattered. And if the smaller parishes around moved at a slower pace or didn't move at all on their precepting, it didn't actually affect the viability of the facility I was running, because it was the home parish council that was of primary importance.
Thank you. I've got a couple of other councillors online. Councillor Stephen, I'll come back to you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. With reference to the previous speaker before Liz, you know, we have to recognise this is an emergency situation. None of us want to be in this situation, and if councils were funded properly, we wouldn't be in this situation. And you know, it's very sad that we have got to sort of look at these things, but you know, if we want to preserve assets and facilities and services for our communities, this is an option that has to be looked at. I chair the Taunton LCN, and Liz very kindly came and gave a very, very useful briefing to all the parish councils there, who actually really heard the message that, you know, this is not something that we have all the full information on, but it's flagging it up to you that you perhaps need to raise your precepts to maybe set up a contingency fund, and maybe even next year you can bring them down. But it's a sensible option to just have a contingency for if something is asked of the parish, which suddenly seems unacceptable, that they have a way of stepping in to keep it going. And so, you know, we're not saying it's there forever. It could be something that's temporary. There's so many unknowns at the moment, but, you know, the conversations at the parish, at the LCM, were very, very helpful for the parishes to really get a feel as to how this has happened, why it's happening, and what part they can play in preserving community assets and services. So it's just a point I want to make. I have got some concerns. One is this role of the LCN, because, you know, it's talked a lot about it being the vehicle for communicating and getting everybody working together. There is, however, a limit on what an LCN can actually do. And I'm getting really confused by what the pathway is, because as a councillor, I'm being told that councils are talking to officers via parish meetings. I don't know what those conversations are exactly. I don't hear the dialogue. I then have conversations at an LCN, but the people that are going to actually fund things are conversations that are going to happen between the parish councils and the officers. So I'm really would want to request that there is better communication, as in all crises. When things have to get decided, we need to have really clear communication paths. And I'm really struggling to see how this is being followed through. And I'd really like maybe for councillors to have access to those meetings with the parish councillors that the officers have. Because, and I've mentioned this before, that we need to know all the conversations that are going on as councillors so that we can represent our communities and we can support and steer our communities and know that we're all aware of any conversation that's going on between the parties. It's not going to be helpful if different people are having different conversations without full knowledge of what is being discussed. So the communication for me is a biggie. It's a real biggie that I'm just not feeling that everyone is part of the same conversations and needs to be. The other thing is I want to ask the officers what financial context has taken place in devising this plan. You know, what savings are you look at making? And I know the reason for this is to preserve community services, and I totally get that. But I'm really struggling to find out what the financial context of this whole decision is and what it's going to save for our unitary council. And I just wondered what work has been done to financially assess this whole process.
Thank you. Ms. Gurn.
With regard to the communication side of things and discussions that are taking place at local community networks, our LCN teams are very much linked in with Scott and others who are looking at what's coming through from the devolution inbox. And quite often it's the same people, same colleagues that are working with the clerks as well. So Ali Lang, who provides the comms support, she works across the piece, but I think it's a good point. We need to make sure we are sharing that information back out to all stakeholders as well about where those conversations are taking place. In terms of the financial context, I might not be best qualified, but one of the drivers is really around the financial crisis and how we could respond and mitigate to this. So I don't know if any of my colleagues want to pick up on that point.
Mr. Vaughan, do you want to comment on what the total savings target would be for this sort of issue?
I don't think we know, but I'll turn it around the other way. If the council issues a section 114 notice, if commissioners are appointed, these discretionary services will stop, full stop. That's it. That's what they will do. That they are like a receiver's coming into a private company. These aren't services that you have to do legally. They just stop. So actually, this is about trying to do something before that happens and giving towns and parishes the option to take these things on and do them in a different way. If not, they will stop. That will be the financial future to them.
Chair, it's David Mears, isn't it, who did a presentation at the SALC AGM on Saturday. So I'm not going to try and take his words from memory, but he'd done some work for Bridgewater and then he'd projected it across the county. So I think unless anybody who was in the room can be more certain of their memory, it was into quite a number of millions when he was looking across the county as a potential saving for Somerset Council. But I think there's a lot more than that, because I think there's a great deal more to be said about how services can be delivered locally better, as well as taking financial pressure off Somerset Council, where social care puts on more pressure, which are, after all, the people who live in each of those parishes and towns and city. I think we should not lose sight of the fact that services can be delivered locally better using local contractors, smaller contracts, and get better efficiency for people's money. And I've heard double taxation mentioned a few times, but I don't see that as people being taxed twice to do the same thing. I see people being taxed nationally, taxed for their Somerset Council tax, which is very clear what we're delivering through Somerset Council, and then separately through their parish, where their parish money stays local and often gets them better value pound by pound. I think it is a really complex picture, and I've seen some really, really good work in both Street and Glastonbury, where I don't sit on either council, but I've attended their meetings for many years. And I know that very good work is going on, but it is uneven. Some parish and town councils are doing tremendous amounts of work. Some have previously precepted 40% more or 25% more and have taken on delivering more local services by choice in advance of this emergency position, and others haven't. There does seem to be a real need, which I completely understand, to have a greater levelling so that people understand what is and isn't delivered locally. But we don't want a section 114 notice to put us in that position. We want to be able to do that far in advance of any government commissioners coming anywhere near Somerset boundaries.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, we wanted to come back.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I've then got Councillor Osborne online as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of questions. It seems that a lot of communication, a lot of work is going out through the Somerset Association of Local Councils and the Society of Local Council Clerk of SLCC, the clerks body. How are you going to ensure that information gets out? So you've got equality of information going out to those parishes that aren't members of SALC or their clerks aren't members of SLCC. And in particular, it's already been raised before the parish meetings. That's my first question. My second one is, and it's relating to the paper and probably the practicalities, is that when it comes to business cases, you won't be requiring a business case for everything. There may be smaller deals where you feel that a business case is not needed to be produced by the authority looking, the organisation looking to take on. How are you going to make that decision between one and the other to ensure consistency? And my third question is on member consultation, and it relates back to my previous question. Members are going to be consulted where a business case is required, but in the paper it looks as though that isn't going to happen for smaller scale devolution asset services. And yet in the assets framework, I think we got that corrected, that there would be member involvement at all levels, whether it's a large transaction or a small one. Can we have an assurance that members will be consulted on any asset or service devolution deal, no matter what its size? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go.
So I totally take the point that not all local councils are members of either SALC or SLCC. We are working in partnership with both of those organisations to make sure we are joining up on communications. However, the council does message and invite every single city, town and parish council and parish meeting to its regular briefings, and also any newsletters that go out will go to all of those organisations. So we do make sure from our perspective that we are getting the messages out there. In terms of business case, it's a case of it being proportionate to what that project's trying to achieve. Where it is a straightforward assets disposal matter, it would absolutely go through the asset disposal policy. So we wouldn't actually change anything within that policy that's just recently been adopted. And in terms of member consultation, again, it's something we would definitely look to involve members in, particularly division members where there's something happening in their area. But again, it might be down to time, scale and extent in terms of what we can do, but we will certainly focus on making sure that it is as transparent as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. I'd like a bit more clarity on how you're going to decide again on what's proportionate, because there are sort of certain grey areas, boundaries, and what you don't want is one organisation saying, I had to produce a business case for X, but you didn't ask another organisation to do so, when it might be something that's similar. So it's probably seeing a little bit more clarification on what that's going to look like in practice. And I'm very glad to hear that members will be involved. And I think that was a point that Dawn made as well, that you know, members do need to sort of know what's going on as well. And I have to say, I've got a very good parish clerk. He's absolutely excellent in terms of sharing some information with me. And I feel that what's been coming out of Salk has been far more beneficial to me as a councillor than anything else so far.
Thank you, Ms. Girton.
Thank you. Just to say, we hope you take on board around when we bring this, when we develop the framework further, we could be a bit more specific about what a business case looks like and what the different scales might be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Also, just on the parish council front, I know sometimes parishes change their emails quite frequently. Certainly, a number of my patch have. So it would be useful actually if you're not getting responses from parishes, if you maybe contact the local member, because as I say, I know I had an instance recently of one with an insurance company that they'd missed their renewal because they sent it to the old email address rather than the current one. So it would be useful to make sure you're making contact if there are any that are missing. Councillor Seeb.
Thank you, Chairman. A while back, the issue was raised about whether Somerset taxpayers would end up paying a lot more than the average council tax as a result of this shunting around of cost. I fear there may be some weight to be given to that. If you check our council tax resolution for this year, you'll see that our average parish band D was £105.99. That compares with the England and Wales average parish band D of £79.35. And whilst our basic tax as a unitary is at towards the lower end at 2116 for band D against 2139 for the average, that's not a lot of headroom when it comes to actually answering that question. And you also have to bear in mind that some parishes have much higher band Ds. I think Martok is the highest near to me that I'm aware of at 228. Langport? Well, oh yes, 277.83. That's what it says here. Okay, I beg your pardon, I'm looking at last year's number. So I beg your pardon, those figures I gave you for the previous year, and there's been an average of 6% inflation in the parish sector coming into this year. So yeah, I think there's a real risk that we are leading people down a bit of an expensive path, albeit a nice one.
Thank you very much. I think members, we've hopefully, Ms. Girton, you found it useful. Members have raised obviously a number of issues. I'm not going to try and summarise everything that we've dealt with today, but you have got obviously the comments that have been made, and there's things that need addressing. There's obviously, as we said, a lot of work that's going to be going into this over a very short period of time. So, Councillor Seeb.
Sorry, Chairman, can I correct? I was looking at the 23-24 council tax resolution. You may be thinking about the precept you just said. Next year's.
We'll let you sort that one out between you later. But as I say, thank you very much for the presentation. I think obviously it's an issue of high import at the moment, and obviously, as members have said, it's a very short period of time for the parishes to work as well, but we're having to work to a timetable. So I think most parishes will understand the pressures that the council is under, but we just need to do everything we can to help them help us. But thank you. If members are happy, we'll move on to the next item, which is actually, I think, our final item, which is the forward plan. Jackson, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I won't keep you long, committee. Just to flag up that the next meeting is very soon after the new year on the 4th of January. It will be taking place in this room as well, so make sure that that is in your diaries. And then obviously the following meeting after that is the 1st of Feb, which will be the main MTFP consideration. The venue of that is subject to confirmation at the moment, so we will confirm that as soon as we can. But obviously, if members have any additional items they'd like to add, although I would flag up that the January agenda is quite full already. But if there is something pressing, we can look at moving things around. Thank you, Chair.
I think looking at that agenda in terms of, I don't think included on there at the moment is the finance update as well, which will be another item on that agenda. And I would hope that we may have some feedback from one of the working parties potentially by then, as the that's a review potentially would cover that too. And
Yeah, sorry, that was on a version I've seen. So yes, that there will definitely be.
Okay, so I think our next agenda in January is going to be pretty full anyway, but obviously if there are other issues that you wish to put on the agenda going forward, please feed them in. Can I thank you all very much for your contributions today, and I wish you all a Merry Christmas, and see you all in the new year, if not before. But thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair.
Great. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.